Hello, and thank you for listening to Mapping the Zone, a podcast that is ordinarily dedicated to informal discussion of the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. However, as has been the case for 6 months now, almost, which is crazy enough on its own, we are actually taking this episode to discuss Infinite Jest. If you clicked on this episode and you didn't know that, I'm very curious how you ended up here, and I would love you to email us and tell me how that happened.
Gotta be a good
Um,
story.
I am your host, the feminized American.
And I am just Cody.
One day, maybe episode 10, when we're done, that won't phase you in the way that it so clearly does.
I know it's coming, and I'm like, I should have some witty retort to throw in there, and I never do. So yeah, maybe I'm just gonna save something for the final episode of this.
I'm gonna have to throw on one of these episodes what you wrote on the mail package instead of that as the name that I'm using. All right, so this episode that we are gonna be discussing covers. Well, we're not discussing the episode. This is the episode in which we are discussing.
Oh my god, how meta would that be? A commentary episode on our own commentary?
That's what we actually do instead of doing Crying of Plot 49 again when we get to the end. We're just going to do a commentary on each of our episodes of Crying of Plot 49.
Love it.
The pages we are covering in this episode is 503 through 601. Cody, what did you think of these pages?
So, I like this section. That being said, I found myself not finding as much to take notes on throughout it. A lot of it, there's so much just character work and backstory and understanding a lot of the characters a little bit more. So it's an enjoyable section. It's just not one that I found particularly remarkable, I guess would be the right word. That being said, it also does have, I love some of the conversations that take place. The Morath and Steepley conversations obviously are great. There's a really good conversation with Joelle Van Dyne and God, I can't think of who she was talking to. We'll get there.
Her and Gately when she tells
her and Gately. Yeah. That's a really good conversation. Yeah, there's really good parts in here. It's just I just didn't find myself like taking a whole lot of notes throughout it.
Did anything change for you between your last reading and this one?
No, not particularly. I guess really, if anything, it really is, as I've mentioned so many times before, like it's really helping solidify these characters in my mind and understanding more. I think understanding them more, knowing their fate at the end of the book is a really interesting way to approach it, because you can kind of see the trajectory and know where it's going to land, and seeing how Wallace was setting all of this up as the story progresses is just fascinating, because you really start to realize, I mean, obviously I think if you read the book once through, you should hopefully walk away understanding how important of a book it is and how well written of a book it is. But I think on subsequent reads, you start to really understand how smartly written this was and how very meticulously planned out he seemed to have had all of this, because knowing where everything is going and knowing how the characters are interacting with each other and what this is all leading to really hammers home how strong of a writer he was. And for this to be a second novel is astonishing.
Yeah. For me, that really is hit home by the Bruce Green section, in particular.
Oh yeah.
Once the POV swaps from Lenz to Green, that's really where like a lot of things about like just how talented and how genius of a writer Wallace was in his own right really came to bear on me in this particular reading.
Absolutely.
My last question is, how much do you hate Randy Lenz?
So that's something that I had not forgotten about. I remember, like, once I saw his name, I was like, oh fuck hell, Lenz. And yeah, he's really a well-written character, but holy shit, do I want to just beat him with a car battery. He is reprehensible.
Yeah, truly reprehensible. For me, yeah, I kind of agree that like there are two standout segments of this chunk of pages. One is the Blue Room incident where Hal and uh, Pemulis and the two underclassmen are kind of sitting there waiting to be reprimanded.
Oh yeah,
However that's gonna
yeah.
look like that's a really standout chunk of these pages for me, especially because like on this particular read through, what is coming up for a lot of me is these kind of it's actually very similar to I was realizing this because I'm rereading The Lucky Star by William T. Vollmann, and him and Wallace have a similar thing where they will write scenes where there's almost like this omniscient eye, like floating in a room that is moving around with the perception of a character, but is showing you all of these different like details of a room and what is kind of going on in that room. And that is a really great sort of segment in which Wallace is engaging in that kind of writing. And then yeah, the whole Randy Lenz Bruce Green thing is the other like big thing for me here. Like it's great to get an insight into like what the concavity actually is and how it's this
Yeah.
permanently expanding and contracting sort of tract of both wasteland and like verdant Edenic landscape. And then also being able to experience Mario's point of view for the first time in the book is great, but um, for me, those two chapters in particular, the Blue Room incident and the Bruce Green Randy Lenz stuff is really standout. And I would say that like especially from my previous readings, the Bruce Green Randy Lenz one was really where like a lot of stuff about how Wallace is a talented writer, not just in his character writing, but also in the sort of lightly experimental writing that he engages in here, where he's clearly leaning on his kind of tradition of postmodernism and of the more avant-garde stuff that he found really inspiring. That comes into full force there. Also, the like visceral nature of how it is that he can describe violence also goes within full force there. The
Hmm.
way in which he seamlessly is capable of kind of moving point of views happens there. His environmental description happens there. Like so many of the things that feel to me like distinctly Wallesian can be found in that segment in a way that I don't know if I necessarily recognized before. Like I think especially when you're reading that book for the first time, like yourself, or I guess even from my perspective a couple of times, the thing that really stands out in that segment is unfortunately the pet murdering.
Right.
And that kind of overshadows like a lot of the other stuff that is going on in that as far as the actual like sentence level craft of what Wallace is doing. So
It's
yeah,
interesting that you mentioned that because I think in this second reading for me, knowing the visceral detail with which a lot of the abuses that Lenz is partaking in, it almost kind of forced me to focus more on the surrounding text, if that makes sense.
sure.
Like
That
I
does.
was I was a lot more engaged with everything around it, and then when those particular moments came up, it was kind of like just get through it real quick, and then let's get on to let's enjoy the scene setting more, and not so much the action that Lenz is engaging in, but the surroundings that he's in, and the description of his mindset maybe even isn't as bad as actually watching his actions unfold. So
Right.
it's yeah, having that foreknowledge of what he's going to do kind of forced me to like reevaluate the way I read that section, I guess.
Yeah, agreed completely. So that I would say that would be my kind of biggest takeaway is understanding that I can point to all of the different things that I particularly like about Wallace and the things that I think is important in his fiction writing. They all live in that segment, and I don't know if I necessarily appreciated that in full in previous readings. So it was nice to be able to sort of notice it this time. I also used an entire highlighter just on these 100 pages.
Really?
Yeah, between doing Infinite Jest and Against the Day, I
Oh
think
yeah,
that
that would,
I think that I have used in total 7 highlighters.
that's impressive.
Um, and Against the Day, I burned out 2 for the last episode we recorded, and then, I had a third that was, like, hanging on for dear life, and that got burned out pretty early on into the Infinite Jest reading, and then I had a 4th highlighter that I like found rolling around at the bottom of a desk that I had never used because it came as part of like an annotating kit that I got from a bookstore. Um, and I used the entirety of it in this in this one segment. There are vast swaths of Bruce Green text that are just highlighted from top to bottom at this point.
So what you're saying is we should be sponsored by like Papermate or 3M or something.
If Zebra wants to send us free midliners, specifically in fuchsia, um, I would absolutely endorse those. If any listeners want to send me Zebra midliners, specifically in fuchsia, for the purpose of both Infinite Jest and Against the Day, I would be very grateful from the bottom of my deeply damaged female heart. Because I just keep running out of them, and you cannot get midliners in boxes of 12. So every single time I use one up, I have to take the bus or drive out to the Barnes and Noble that sells them in singles and just sort of grab an entire fistful of them and then march up to the counter like an absolute sociopath and just purchase like 12 highlighters at once. Anyway, this section of pages opens with Ken Erdetti and Joelle Van Dyne kind of commiserating at a NA meeting, and then eventually Roy Tony arrives and we have a discourse presented on hugging. After that, we get a revisit to Steepley and Marath, who are somehow still on the hill. The entire sort of day-night cycle has effectively passed, and it is starting to rope around back to a whole new day as the sun is rising just over the edge of the horizon. Then from there, we are brought into the Blue Room, which is a reference to the sort of waiting area of the administration and its offices at ETA. That goes on for quite a while until eventually we switch back to Marath and Steepley, and it is now the 1st of May. And then we are brought to Gately's perspective as he has a conversation with Joelle Van Dyne on just like what the deal is with the Veils. Then we are introduced to Randy Lenz's particular nighttime activities that he engages in. And that leads us to a brief POV from Rodney Tyne, or Rod the God Tyne, the chief of the U.S. Office of Unspecified Services. And then we get a real awkward scene with Pemulis walking in on John Wayne and Admiral Incandenza. He is such a piece of shit that like I can't help but like him. Like he's so honest in his self-interestedness, that like I can't be upset about it. He's like a used car salesman in that way. Like,
he has a smarmy charisma that almost makes him like so unlikably likable.
Yes.
It's bizarre.
Yeah, there's zero redeeming qualities about Michael Pemulis.
Yeah.
He is truly, as Wallace would put it, one of the book's antichrists. But I cannot help but just love him as a character because of how naked his self-interest is.
Yeah. Yeah.
We flash back to Lenz and Green continuing at this point, and that carries us almost to the entirety of the chapter, but there are still going to be breaks in there for a conversation between Idris Arslanian and Michael Pemulis in a stairwell outside the gym at ETA, a brief POV of what it's like to live as Don Gately, answering sort of resident calls as well as more of his schedule, and then finally a brief visit to Mario's perspective once again as we close out these pages. So to kind of start with, how do we feel about Wallace's view on hugging?
I love that. I do love that scene.
Yeah.
That, like, the whole idea, like, the way it's written is so effective. Like, I am a person who I don't like hugging unless I know the person or feel comfortable enough to do that. And so it gets really I get the awkwardness and it's palpable. And when Roy Tony explodes on him about like, "Do you think I wanna fucking do this either?" Like, as he's holding him up by his shirt lapels, like,
Yeah.
screaming into his face, like, taking it and just making it, an already awkward situation about 100 times worse. It had me I was laughing, like, hysterically. It's a very funny scene.
There's a lot of vaudeville in these pages.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Between, yeah, him getting held up, the whole thing with Idris blindfolding himself to see if he can play tennis better, and then, like, eventually, like, even amongst the horror of what Randy Lenz is doing, there is a time that he is described as, like, high need stepping like a vaudeville,
Yeah, yeah.
like like, evildoer or something like that. There's a lot of really fun, sort of descriptive elements in there. And yeah, Roy Tony picking him up and just being like, "I'm not doing this because I like it. I'm doing this because you have to do what you're told in order for this to work, and
Yeah,
I'd rather do this than use drugs again."
yeah.
Um, it's really, really funny, and, if you don't remember who Roy Tony is, he is the character that is, like, technically introduced in the Wardeen section from really early in the book. He isn't the perspective of that, it's from the perspective of a child, but he is referenced in relation to this child's mother in particular, or in relation to Wardeen. So that's where he kind of was initially introduced to the reader at. And I also just have to say that, like, I appreciate Ken Erdetti as a character. You know, he is one of the better Edit House residents. Like, you can see that he's somebody who is earnestly trying and, like, not getting in his own way, which is great. But I also love how Wallace uses him to investigate the idea of sort of cannabis addiction, right?
Yes.
Which is something that is, like, is very much not talked about
Or mocked
now.
even, like, it.
Definite Yeah, definitely less so then even. And it's I think it's become, especially through marijuana legalization, both recreationally and medicinally, and the sort of expansion of people who smoke cannabis or ingest cannabis in some way, that, like, there is this prevailing sentiment that it is not addictive because it is not physically addictive in the same way that heroin is, or opioids are in general. Um, when that is not true, you can still get addicted to it. And there's even a mention in this section that I really appreciate, where he is, like, talking about how weird it is that how weird it feels for him to be there for cannabis, rather than any of the, quote, like, hard stuff that all of these
Yeah.
people are here for. And that's, I think, really important, especially now, with how widespread that cannabis use is, and how downplayed its addictive qualities can be for people.
Oh, absolutely, and especially considering that this book came out in the late '90s when that whole kinda concept was really starting to, I guess, peak in a way. I mean, especially, like, you look at a movie like Half Baked, which came out around the same time, and that was a whole there's a whole scene built around that,
Yeah,
you know? So, it's and I have known people who have been addicted to that, and
as if I
it's certainly I'm not gonna sit here and say it's as dangerous of an addiction as something like heroin or cocaine, but it is still an addiction. And I think it often gets kind of pushed around and pushed aside because of the idea of it is a sort of gateway drug, right? It's a more introductory kind of thing, but there are plenty of people who start there and that's where they stay and it gets out of control and it can just as much ruin a life as any of the others.
Yeah, you can have a disordered relationship to anything.
Yep.
And that stigma, as someone who has gone to NA, like, that stigma of, I don't want to go to an NA meeting because my addiction was to cannabis, or to something that is sort of perceivably less severe than one of these other things. That's very true. You know, that is something that I have heard people say. And it's important, I think, that Wallace gives a distinction here, that, like, an addiction is an addiction, whether it's to heroin or bubblegum or cannabis, or, I don't know, filling up your car with gas. Like, you can be
Yeah.
addicted to doing
Yeah.
anything.
I mean, that's just like a central theme of this whole book is
Yeah,
just the
absolutely.
ability to get addicted to just about anything.
Then we get into, uh, some more steeply in Morath stuff where it is revealed that they are testing the entertainment, and that in particular, the craziest part about some of the testing that they have been doing is that people who aren't signed up to undergo the testing to the degree that they're going to are breaking in and watching the internet entertainment just purely out of curiosity.
Mhm.
And then, of course, that leads them to get their brains, microwaved, just like everybody else. And that, unfortunately, proves Marath's point about how the AFR does not need to like systematically show it on the screens in Times Square or broadcast it on TV or whatever. That all they're really going to do is just make it available, and that's going to be enough.
Mhm. That's all it takes.
That is all it takes. Um, and there's a question that is eventually going to be put about sort of, you know would you watch it? What would happen if you did? It gets deeper into this as we basically go, because we are going to get treated to a description of what the video at least starts with
Yeah,
more than
opening
anything else.
scene.
Yeah. Um, and there's a really great description here on 508 where it says, "Frankly, when I think of it, I am as much terrified as I am intrigued. Hank Hoyne is an empty shell. The iron will, the analytic savvy, his love of a fine cigar, all gone. His world as if it collapsed into one small bright point. Inner world lost to us. You look in his eyes, and there's nothing you can recognize in them. Poor Miriam. Steeply needed a bare shoulder. Willis on the IO night shift came up with a phrase for their eyes. Empty of intent appeared in the memo. Um, it is true that like what you do is when you're addicted to something, you are empty of intent. Your intent is now solely focused on getting whatever it is that you're addicted to, getting whatever the substance or the behavior or whatever you're engaged in that gives you kind of that pulse. And I think of, again, not to, I feel like I say this like every episode, but like not to sound like old man yells at clouds like .gif, but like there is something also that is true within the kind of TikTok and social media age that I feel like is especially relevant of a phrase of empty of intent like that, where it has found a way to like monetize addiction effectively, where you can get that dopamine off of the things that you post and off of the reactions that people give to the things that you post. But it can also come to real money, and you can identify different ways in which, if you represent yourself a certain way on these platforms, or if you sort of get in on a trend of something that will then lead to some of those monetary or dopamine rewards. And so your intent, more so than with something like, I think, drugs, because it can provide like a very genuine positive feedback in the form of finances, empties you even further of that intent. Of it's not
Yeah.
only the fact that I want to run towards these things because like my addiction is to them, but I can actually see a benefit off of it, which makes that so much more insidious in a way that I think a lot of the sort of traditional addictions are not.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just finished, and I've been talking with you and Luke and Will like a ton about it, but I finished a book recently called The Chaos Machine by I think it's
I was
Max
going to ask you
Fisher
about
is his
this
name.
episode.
It is so like it reading it concurrently with this book is it is fascinating because the whole conceit of The Chaos Machine is about how social media has essentially done what the entertainment in Infinite Jest is set up to do. It's this idea that this technology has been just provided essentially for free at the base level. And it gets to a point and has gotten to a point with us now that it has consumed so much of our lives, and that the people running it are so much more interested in their own um self value and how they can profit from it than anything else. So like, not to get too far into the weeds about it, but companies like YouTube and Reddit and Facebook have all had instances in the past wherein they have basically like Myanmar is a fine example of this. Like they went into Myanmar in 2014, YouTube and Facebook, and they gave the country free internet, totally, absolutely free, subsidized it and everything, and they just wanted to quote unquote have the people of Myanmar have access to connection and connect with the world and this and that and the other. Within 2 years, a fringe conspiracy theorist became a dictator of the country and had promoted videos through YouTube and Facebook and Reddit that encouraged the killing and other atrocities of Muslim people in the country on completely fabricated um, concepts and news stories. And all of this was done because these giant tech companies didn't want to stop getting views. They literally could have flipped a switch to stop all of that. But the idea of losing hours of viewership meant more to them than human life. So it's these conversations between Steepley and Morath where, Morath is like, yeah, we don't have to put it out and show it to everybody and force people to watch it. Like all we have to do is just say, here it is. And people's inherent curiosity is going to get the better of them and it will spread like wildfire. And then somebody will get a hold of it. They won't care about its consequences. As long as it benefits them in some way, shape, or form, they will continue to disseminate it. And this will become an exponential problem.
Yeah, very true. And, effectively everybody becomes a content moderator. Everyone gets to decide what it is that they're going to pay attention to and what they're not, and that has inherently negative consequences in a lot of ways. Anything else that you want to add from this early Morath and Steepley section?
No.
Okay.
It's a pretty short little section between them, but it's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just the way that he describes the way that the entertainment empties people out, like that vision of Hank Hoyne just like ruined, especially in the next section when they start talking about like the sometimes like physical symptoms that a lot of these people have where they like are actually slack-jawed and they're like drooling and they're just begging people to give it back to them. Like it's such an effective precursor to that in this section here. So what do we think of the Blue Room chapter? I feel like there's a couple of things to discuss within the Blue Room. There's Charles Tavis as a human being. There's an expansion on Avril Incandes's character. We have to talk about Lateral Alice more.
Yeah, yep.
And then finally we have kind of the crescendo of the actual setup as they get called into the office. So what did you think about this segment of the book?
Yeah, so you nailed it all. There's amongst all the great writing, and especially the descriptions of the room, like 509, and also the over enhanced blue of the wallpaper sky, which the wallpaper scheme was fluffy cumuli arrayed patternlessly against an over-enhancedly blue sky, incredibly disorienting wallpaper that was by an unpleasant coincidence also the wallpaper from the infield offices of Dr. Zegarelli, DDS, which Hal's just come back from after a removal. Yeah, it's a fun scene. I got so much more into the kind of backstory of Lateral Alice more than I remembered from the first go around, and I had totally forgotten about the fact that you could get her to just drum on her chest to talk, so it sounded like she was back in the helicopter doing traffic reports. That one stopped me for a while because I was just laughing my ass off.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
It's yeah, and then there's just a lot of little things in here that I love. There's a description of Lateral Alice's her fingernails. It says on 513, Alice Moore's bluish fingertips make her painted nails 10 little sunsets, which is a beautiful image. Not so much when you consider the fact that she has this blood oxygen deficiency situation that's causing that.
She has like Raynaud's to
So that part's not nice, but it's a beautiful description. And then I ended up highlighting the note 213 because the idea of the way people reacted on the court when the ball went to the wrong place, and rather than doing the normal human thing of going over and grabbing it, or not going, like, of yelling and being like, "Hey, ball in court
Oh,
3," or whatever.
yep.
I would do that. Because of how my brain works, I would just be like, "No, I have to go get that." And so I would make my way across there as awkwardly as possible, because in some way in my mind, that's the easier solution to that problem. So once again, Wallace has really pinned down my psyche and my character. But um, yeah, and then learning more about Tavis, this is, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, like, it's really interesting and fun to read about these characters and just kind of get more depth on them, and understand more about where they're coming from, and how they kind of work into all of this. Um, is fascinating.
Yeah. Tavis is such an interesting character because, like, he is he is doing something inherently wrong, obviously, and,
Oh
like,
yeah,
sleeping with his sister-in-law or whatever. It escapes my mind right now what their actual relation to one
that's
another.
yeah, it's sister-in-law.
Um, and like breaking up a marriage as a result of it, right? And also stealing the job of the guy whose marriage you broke up, who killed himself
Yep.
after you did that. So like there's a lot of things about him that should make him this like slimy, greasy like piece of shit in the same way as like a Randy Lenz almost. But instead, he's just this incredibly anxious school administrator.
Mhm.
And like that is such a complicated thing for Wallace to make that character into when like there is an easier way out, right? Of just making him like malevolently a villain.
Yeah.
And instead of doing that, you make his sort of evil acts or his villainous acts just part of who he is as a person instead of what makes this character just himself, right? And that's I think really impressive because he does that not just for the major characters, of course, like a Hal or a Gately, but he also does that level of detail for everybody in the book. Like Bruce Green is going to get a major amount of character detail here.
Mhm.
Tavis is going to, even lateral Alice Moore, an even smaller character, still is given a backstory and kind of a raison d'etre that he doesn't need to give these people. Like there are
Right.
easier ways for him to go about it. And I think the fact that he does it on such a deep level across so many characters and throughout the whole book is really part of what I've said it a number of times of really what makes this book seem like it is projecting a real world. Like there is a world
Mhm.
here that feels like a place you can live. And then that really stuck out to me with a lot of the Tavis stuff here.
Yeah.
Um, And of course, the blue sky is the same thing as the book's like most famous cover and what's been
Yep.
used over and over again. So effectively, this is a piece of wallpaper from the Enfield Tennis Academy sort of waiting room. Um, the fact that Alice Moore became injured because her helicopter ran into another helicopter, and then she fell from the helicopter and didn't die
Yeah.
is quite a ridiculous backstory for her. Um, I also shouts out to the amazing line, "You can tell Pemulis really is studying because he keeps turning something upside down and then right
Oh,
side
yeah.
up on page 511,"
Yeah.
which I absolutely love. Before I go back to some of the more detail on Charles Tavis, though, just lateral Alice Moore, like what a fun character between the absurdity of her backstory, but the whole third rail that she travels back and
Yes.
forth on. And the fact that instead of sort of a name plaque on her desktop, it is just a sign that says danger third rail in neon, seemingly.
Yeah,
Because
that's the
yeah,
implication.
when Pemulis comes back to the office later in these pages, like it's turned off along with all of the other equipment, which and there's something about that that's really funny to me. Not the fact that the sign is there, but that it's shut off along with everything else at the end of the
Uh-huh.
night. But there was one thing that just absolutely uh, killed me um, in terms of lateral Alice Moore that I'm gonna have to find because it's one of on 518. Uh, But back in August, Hal had sat in the very chair Trevor Axford is now nodding off in. Very late in the day, like dusk, having had an informal exhibition match with a visiting Latvian satellite pro, go an encouraging 3 sets that PM so that he'd missed Mrs. C's stuffed peppers at supper, his stomach making those "where's the food" noises from around the transverse colon, alone in the blue room waiting, the chair bobbing reflexively, with lateral Alice Moore gone home to her long apartment and rooms only 2 meters wide in Newton, and an opaque plastic dust thing wrapped tight over her Intel processor and intercom console, and the little red danger light on her danger roll plaque unlit. Oh my god. The phrase "long apartment," it
Yeah.
made me laugh for probably 5 minutes as I was just imagining someone saying, like, "It's like an apartment, but long."
Right.
And just everything is perfectly set up for someone who just travels horizontally and can never move sort of vertically on a 2D plane.
Yeah,
It just
that line broke me too.
oh, it's so, so funny. Um, and I love the acknowledgement too that, like, a good school administrator is someone who is, like, I don't have the phrase highlighted, but it's like the best school administrators, which Lateral Ellismore is, uh, are the ones who can, like, listen to a student yell at them while also filing, like, paperwork and
Oh,
maintaining a
yeah.
calendar, and both providing encouragement and a rebuff to another student who's, like, hitting on them or something like
Yeah,
that.
the bizarre multitasking that takes place.
Yeah, and, like, that is something that is so true to life that I only know because Allie works in a school, and she
Yeah,
told me that
I've
if
learned
I
that from working at a school.
there you go, yeah, where she says if you ever wanna, like, do really well in that school from a standpoint of being able to get in touch with people or sort of, like, hear all of the news, you need to befriend the school administrator or the school,
Absolutely.
like, executive assistant, or the school, office manager or whatever the title might be. That those are sort of the keys to power, so to speak, in any building. Um, and I love all of the little character stuff that he gives all of these different characters in here, including, someone as relatively minor as Alice Moore. But I guess, um, I wanted to ask your opinion of Tavis as an individual. We get the one kind of scene with him conceptualizing the need to be, like, in this state of total worry when he's sort of watching the AM drills, but that's so far really the most detail we've been given up to this kind of lengthy kind of unspooling of his backstory and his kind of life experience. What do you think of him as a character at that point?
Like you mentioned earlier, he is really interesting in that he is this kind of like gross, smarmy character who we shouldn't like, but is likable. Not to the extent of Pemulis. Like I don't think what he's doing is as borderline depraved as Pemulis sometimes does.
Yeah.
But he is still, he is essentially the a primary component in himself's death, probably because of the dissolution of the marriage that was happening at the time. Um, and the fact that he just openly carries on having a relationship with April, um, which is probably a work conflict of interest at the very least, as well as he's also that would make him Hal's. Like if they were to marry, he would be Hal's dad and uncle, I think, at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, dad and
So
uncle-in-law maybe, I guess?
yeah, something like that. But then at the same time, so this is like to your point about Wallace taking these sort of I don't want to say inconsequential characters, but these sort of background characters, for lack of a better term, Lateralis Moore and Tavis, for example. The fact that he's able to humanize them so much and make us care about them, in spite of their flaws, or maybe because of, um, but the fact that we want to continue to learn about them and understand them and know who they are really drives home how good he is at like you said, building this world up and inhabiting it with characters. Because it would be really easy to just have a story where you just have this character in the background who, yeah, he's sleeping with the main character's mom and he broke up their marriage and he's also the headmaster of the school now and that's it. But to give us all um everything that he gives us about Tavis, about lateral, it's more like adds so much depth to them and just really helps to um I said humanize them, but that's the only word I can think of. Like the idea, like is the anxiety. Okay, so I think what really gets the most about him is the fact that he is so confident that he can carry out this affair with the utmost, suave charm or whatever it took to charm Alice. Not Alice, sorry, April, while at the same time being a huge ball of anxiety. And I think what really encompasses his like the portrayal of his anxiety, I think for me was his reverse stairmaster thing. What is it? The stair blaster is what it
Yeah.
was. Yeah.
Scare blaster.
Like the level of neuroticism you have to have to like openly engage with this technology on, on a routine basis just
After
speaks volumes.
well, and it's modified to run faster.
Yes.
And he did this after he got one slightly elevated cholesterol test.
Yeah.
It's really the whole picture that paints just how neurotic this man is.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like he gets one small bit of bad news that's like, yeah, it's not great, but a little bit of work, you'll be fine. And it completely overdoes it. Such a fun way.
I love the way he starts introducing his backstory here on 516. It says he'd been on design teams for stadia and civic centers and grandstands and micrological looking superdomes. He'd admit up front that he'd been a far better team player engineer than out up there front and stage center in the architectural limelight. He'd apologize profusely when you had no idea what that sentence meant and say maybe the obfuscation had been unconsciously deliberate out of some kind of embarrassment over his first and last limelighted architectural supervision up in Ontario before the rise of Odinite interdependence when he designed the Toronto Blue Jays novel and much ballyhooed Skydome Ballpark and Hotel Complex. Because Tavis had been the one to take the lion's share of the heat when it turned out that Blue Jays spectators in the stands, many of them innocent children wearing caps, and pounding their little fists into the gloves they brought with hopes of nothing more exotic than a speared foul ball, that spectators at a distressing number of different points all along both foul lines could see right into the windows of guests having various and sometimes exotic sex in the hotel bedrooms over the center field wall. The bulk for the call for Tavis's rolling ahead had come, he'd tell you, when the cameraman in charge of the Skydome's instant replay video scoreboard, disgruntledly and professionally suicidal, or both, started training his camera on the bedroom windows and routing the resultant multi-lid coital images up onto the 75-meter scoreboard screen, etc. Sometimes in slow motion with multiple replays, etc. Tavis will admit his reluctance to talk about it still after all this time. He'll confess that his usual former career summary is to say just that he'd specialized in athletic venues that can safely and comfortably seat enormous numbers of live spectators, and that the market for these services had bottomed out as more and more events were designed for cartridge dissemination and private home viewing, which he'll point out is not technically untrue so much as just not entirely open and forthcoming. That, I want to stress this in case the reader didn't catch it because it's subtle. What Wallace is telling you is this is basically how he introduces himself to people.
Yes. Yes.
That when someone asks him, "What do you do?" he relays the entire story about the sex at the hotel at the Blue Jays stadium and how it led to him like being fired and having to pivot to working at the school. That's how he greets people. This man is the most in his own head neurotic crazy person who's ever lived. Oh,
My
it's
God.
so funny. I love it so much.
And I want to read the description of his stair blaster real quick because I'm still in my mind. This is note 220. CardioMed fitness products, the fourth generation stairmaster thing, except set more to resemble a down escalator, somehow dicky to a sadistically high number of RPMs, so that the exerciser has to sort of run climbing for his life to avoid getting hurled backwards all the way across the office by the machine, which is what accounts for the big square weight room floor mat attached to the cleared expanse of office wall opposite the rear of the machine, which Tavis has moved up from his stairmaster after a frightening cholesterol count report and had kind of a tricky time with it first, once requiring a back brace. Oh god.
that he's been flung into the wall enough that he needs to make sure that there's a mat is
A floor mat
so
at that too.
fucking funny. Oh, it's just like you read certain authors and you're just like kind of pissed that you're never going to be as good of a writer as they are.
Yep, yep.
And with Wallace, it hits you on like all fronts. His like actual just abilities in prose, his humor, his character, like it's all so well done that it's just he is in my mind like the best writer that I've ever engaged with at any point.
It's so fun.
It's crazy how good he is at just everything he does.
Yeah, I've gotten to the point now when I mention Infinite Jest to people and they kind of have that look of like, oh, that's that really big, scary book. I always have to mention like almost the first thing, like it's one of the funniest books I have ever read.
Yeah.
Genuinely one of the funniest books.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I also love, before we get into Avril, I love there's something that feels so both sitcom but then also real about this brief exchange between Hal and Orthos Dice. On page 520 where it says, then Orthos Dice has entered the hot waiting room, shirt wet, and crew cut matted from the courts and toting his Wilsons, and made right for the AC vents downdraft outside Travis's little vestibule. Stice's clothes were comped by Fila, and when he played any sort of match, he wore all black, and at ETA and on tour, he was known as the Darkness. He had a crew cut and the beginnings of jowls. He and Hal exchanged the very slight sorts of nods people use when they like each other, past all need for politeness. They had similar games, although most of Stice's touch was at the net. Stice raised one hand to his eyes and cocked his head slightly in the direction of the office's lamplight. That little guy gonna be a long time in there? You have to ask? Like, there's just something about that, from like the acknowledgement of a nickname that they have for him based on the fact that he is strangely short, to just like Hal's acknowledgement in return being another just piece of culture that exists within ETA, that is just sort of felt by the reader, both because Tavis is talking to this like 9-year-old in way too verbose of terms, but also because like, you know, it is gestured at and how the rest of these characters are described. Like he introduces himself with like a whole 10-minute long story, right? So like of course he's going to be long-winded about everything that he does. It's just, again, some incredible writing that exists across all of Wallace's work in this book, but that it really stood out to me this time. Do we have anything else on Tavis before we move on to the moms?
I don't know.
Okay. So we get some more information on the moms. If you were sort of having any doubts as to whether or not she was a manipulative person, that should be kind of put away by this point if you're reading along with us. Because it is shown very much so here how she is a masterclass manipulator in like the worst way possible, that also I feel like only your parents are capable of.
Yes.
In a really interesting way to kind of just like see that laid out in a novel. What do you think of Avril now at this point?
So it's this book just kind of keeps hitting really close to home for me. There are parts of Avril that very much remind me of my own mom, who thankfully has gotten a lot better about her tendencies, but definitely used to have that sort of controlling and manipulative tendency. I think the best representation of how Avril's mind works is her what is it called? The MGM group that she started, the grammatical group that like strictly enforces
The Militant Grammarian Society.
Yeah, Militant Grammarians, thank you. That, you know, goes to the extent of, you know, like writing these long-winded letters to grocery stores about it's not 10 items or less, it should be 10 items or fewer. There's a whole I think the longest note in this subsection is about her, if I'm not mistaken.
Or in sort of refusing to talk about the moms, but doing so anyway.
Yeah. So the interview that he has with with Steeply about that ends up being about his mom and whether or not she had OCD and um yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that that's kind of a parental thing. And I don't know if it comes about from having kids, like the actual just like going from not having kids to having kids, or the type of kid that you have and how that plays into your own preset sort of anxieties and everything. Um, because she very clearly, I mean, as we talked about at the beginning, I think it was this first or second episode, maybe the idea that she seems very much to care about her kids, but the reality is she doesn't. At least not as far as she can benefit from them and use them in a way that she finds works for her. Um, but there is this sort of like underlying sociopathy within her. I think that is pointed out a lot more in Oren's interview, that we start to kind of understand who she really is, that a lot of it is a put on and is a persona, and the story of her finding Hal with the basement mold
Yeah.
that he that like I as a parent I can relate to that. I have not had that situation, but I've had close situations of, your child bringing you something and it turns out to be one of the most disgusting things you've ever seen and they don't think twice about it. That's a very real thing. But um I don't know. I guess maybe in my first read through, I didn't block as much of her narcissistic and obsessive tendencies than I am now. So that's another one of those things that's kind of opening up to me in a subsequent reading.
I love the detail, especially of the fact that she has this habit of needing to establish herself in the exact center of
Yes.
of every
Yes.
room. Like, I love that detail so
And the
much.
lack of doors on her, like
Yeah,
anywhere where she is a really interesting little quirk that she has too.
yeah, it's this and, like, she is the most sort of effective, I guess, manipulator or narcissistic sort of personality because she's also kind of funny and is,
Yeah.
like, engaging to talk to from a standpoint of how she kind of uses humor or a certain charisma, certainly, to, like, mask what she's actually doing, like, it isn't enough for her to say, like, "Oh, I think I have, like, some fruit that I can give you." It's happen to have a Granny Smith here to tie you over body and soul, or whatever it is that she says,
Mhm.
right? Or the kind of fake, "Man, there's a word that means this, and I'm just trying to think," and she's, like, actually, like, leaned over, like, knitting her fingers into her forehead.
Mhm.
Like, it's the whole sort of production of that, and that is, like, inherently a bit endearing or at least engaging to be kind of on the other side of.
Yeah.
It's almost like she's doing bits with people, but the bits are things that just get her what she wants in real life.
Yeah. Well, and it's also this is I think where, unless I missed it earlier, this is where it pointed out that Hal's obsessiveness with um, rote memorization of dictionaries, it kind
Yeah.
of comes from her.
Yep.
So you can.
Which Oren comments on in the interview where he says, I mean, like, he
Mhm.
says something to the effect of, like, "Oh, Jesus Christ, she's got him, like, reciting dictionary words every day.
Yep.
Been like that since he was 5, still like that now that he's 17," or something along those lines.
Yeah, and you can see how that neurosis kind of blends and barrels over into Hal.
Yeah.
Oren, I think, is kind of like because he realizes what was happening and kind of saw the manipulation. I think he was able to get away from it a little bit more. But Hal's definitely very clearly a product of that manipulative parenting.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. I mean, they definitely all are in certain
Yeah,
ways.
in different ways, they absolutely are.
Yeah, and I think that this is where I have to say that, like, I don't know the degree to which this is based on Wallace's real life mother. I do know that it is reported that she was furious at the portrayal of this sort of, matriarch of the Inkendenza family.
Well, she was an English teacher, wasn't she?
She was.
Yeah, so that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, yeah, which I mean, I've, like, if we're going with the idea that both himself, Hal, and Mario and Orin are different sort of aspects of David Foster Wallace's personality, this doesn't exactly work, but I do kind of like to imagine in a certain way how odd it would be for James Incandenza to be Wallace's dad in real life, given that his dad was just like a philosophy professor at the University of Illinois for like 50 years, was like a fairly normal guy, where it's like if he was as insane in an alternate reality as Incandenza is, what would that have produced in Wallace as a writer instead of
Yeah.
what he ended up being? But yeah, no, there's definitely some similarities there between Avril and Wallace's real life mother. And she's also, like all of these characters are written really well. The detail about her needing to be in the exact center, and then this quote from 523 where it says, "Orin and Hal's term for this routine is politeness roulette. This mom's thing that makes you hate yourself for telling her the truth about any kind of problem because of what the consequences will be for her. It's like to report any sort of need or problem is to mug her." Orin and Hal had this bit during family trivia sometimes. "Please, I'm not using this oxygen anyway." "What? This old limb? Take it. In the way all the time. Take it." "But it's a gorgeous bowel movement, Mario. The living room rug needed something. I didn't know what till right this very minute." The specialist fantotish chill of feeling both complicit and obliged. Hal despised the way he always reacted, taking the apple, pretend his reluctance to eat her supper was a pretense. Orin believed she did it all on purpose, which was way too easy. He said she went around with her feelings out in front of her with an arm around the feelings windpipe and a Glock 9mm to the feelings temple like a terrorist with a hostage daring you to shoot.
Oh man, that's so good.
It is really, really good because it's also just like that is that I have known several people that act that way.
Mhm.
Like that is absolutely how it feels to be around those people.
Yep.
And it can be infuriating to play into it because that's just easier than, sitting in whatever the uncomfortability is of the other option. And then finally we get in this kind of ending scene where uh the kids are brought into the office. We get a brief sort of move back to Tavis, where I just love that it says Charles Tavis is not a buffoon. The things that are keeping things so tensely quiet out here amid all this waiting room blue is that there are historically at least two Charles Tavises. The three older boys know. The openly cross-sectional and free associating and arms waving on the perspectival horizon, dithering, hand-wringing, total worry persona is really Tavis's version of social composure. His way of trying to get along with you. But just ask Michael Pemulis, whose sneakers have been on Tavis's carpet so often they've left an unvacuumable impression in the checked Antron. When Tavis loses his composure, when the integrity or smooth function of the Academy or his unquestioned place at the ETA tiller is, God forbid, threatened, Hal's openly adjustable uncle becomes a different man, one not to be fucked with. It is not necessarily pejorative to compare a cornered bureaucrat to a cornered rat. The danger sign to watch out for is if Tavis suddenly gets very quiet and very still, because then he seems, prospectively, to grow. He seems sitting there to rush in at you, dopplering in at a whisper, almost looming over you from across the huge desk. If shit meets administrative fan, kids coming out of this mandible-doored office come out pale and rubbing their eyes, not from tears, but from this depth perspective skewing that CT suddenly affects when they're shit. It's just this final twist on the character of like, oh no, he's actually very serious. Especially
Mhm.
after a lot of the earlier stuff, like with the Stair Blaster or the flashback to when he was a child, not engaging and playing with the other kids and instead standing off into the corner like a creep. And it turns out that he did actually verbally say, "I'm going to stand off here in the corner like a creep."
Yep.
Because, all of that stuff, and including the fact that I think is it Shact who's the one who's able to do the impersonation of him so well that they need to tell he's not allowed to do it in front of the like really
Yeah.
young kids because they're not
Yeah.
going to know to be serious in front of him. All of that stuff leads you to believe that like he's kind of a sleazy douchebag and also like a little bit of a buffoon. And then right there at the end of the chapter, like Wallace comes in and adds that last twist of like he is ridiculous, and it is this like state of total worry that he's cultivated for himself. But he is also deadly serious when it comes to either his job or his relative ease in life, basically. And it's just that little bit of just like, I could stop here, but why don't I twist the dial up just a little bit more And again, it helps undersell the realism of these characters, that they are quite literally never two-dimensional in terms of the dimensions that Wallace describes them having to the reader. It's really, really impressive stuff.
Yeah, and I think especially once you see that last scene that you just read, like it makes his relationship with Avril make more sense. The fact that he would be willing to do the things that he did, basically just to crank up the dial, you know? Like, yeah, I've already cheated on or I've you know made my coworker cheat on her husband with me. Why don't I just take his spot? Why don't I just become the new boss? Like, like there always has to be that extra little bit, and I think you mentioned that, and it kind of clicked in my brain that, like, yeah, that makes sense why he works with Avril so well, or why he enjoys
Yep.
being with her.
Yeah. Absolutely true. Um, Anything else you had on the Blue Room sequence? Really, really great stuff. That like to
It is.
it's one of those ones where like you read it and you understand it because it's not opaque, kind of like the governmental stuff. And to best illustrate how genius it is, we would just have to read out like all 15 pages of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, it's a fantastic scene. It really is. I don't have anything more to add to it without going off for like another hour, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So then we go back to Marath and Steepley, and they are talking about whether or not Marath is actually working for the U.S. government or not. We get some more detail on that, and then we get this sort of Medusa and the Odalisque situation. I wanted to ask your interpretation or the impression you got from what Wallace might be discussing there.
Well, so I'm gonna backtrack real quick and start at the beginning of this scene because I think that Steepley's opening line is so typifying of American idealism, where he says,
Oh
"This
yeah,
is 528. You can't say it's only a U.S. thing." Steepley said again. I went through school when multiculturalism was inescapable. We read about the Japanese and Indonesians, for example, having a mythic figure. I forget its name. Oriental myth. It's a woman covered with long blonde hair entirely. Her whole body is blonde down all over it. Just that idea, like that smarmy ass, like, oh yeah, I studied multiculturalism all the time, and like these Japanese gods, I don't remember their names. Like, it's just so prototypically American. I love it.
yeah.
Um, and then yeah, so I don't know. Like, I was gonna ask you what your take was because I think you're probably a little bit more well versed in Greek mythology than I am, and I really should be better about it. But um, the Medusa and Circe and Odalisque, I am sure there is something there, but it just either my brain was not in the right place when I got to that part, or I'm just completely missing the connection to it because of my lack of knowledge in that area.
The Medusa, obviously, we know is a Greek mythical character that when you look at
Right,
it, you
right.
turn to stone, right? Circe or Circe or Kirka, depending on your particular preference pronunciation style, is one of the Odyssey characters. Do you know the segment that she's from in the Odyssey?
Yes.
And then what was the last one? Oh, the Odalisque. The Odalisque is the
Odalisque,
one that
yeah.
I'm not super familiar with. I probably should have dedicated some time to researching that. Um, but I do know that it is one of himself's films. He has a movie called Medusa versus the Odalisque, I
That's
believe,
right, he does.
which I just have to find. Here it is. 988. Holographic fight choreography at Kenjiku Hiroto, Intimate Asia. Black and white silence with audience noises appropriated from network broadcast television. Mobile holograms of two visually lethal mythologic females duel with reflective surfaces on a stage while a live crowd of spectators turns to stone. Um, so to me, that potentially reads as a commentary on the fact that there are these two governments at war with one another. With the mirrors, for example, they're shining the same kind of intent and battle back and forth against one another, and the fallout of that battle having taken place is the audience turning to stone, or in the
Okay.
case of the real situation, that the people that are inevitably going to lose their lives in the process by which that entertainment is disseminated, or anything that a government does. It happens with any number of things, but in this case, I think it has to do with specifically the entertainment.
Yeah,
If
that
it
makes more
kind
sense,
of,
I think,
yeah,
especially
frees the lives of an untold number of people.
yes, while the 2 people responsible for doing it go basically walk off unharmed and
Yeah.
don't suffer the consequences. Yeah, that okay. I think I was yeah, because I think trying to approach it from the actual mythology itself, I couldn't wrap my head around it just because I'm so far removed from it. And I say this having I've read the Odyssey a couple times. I just watched the movie. Um, and my son was, like, huge into Greek mythology for a while, but yeah, but I think either way it ties more into, like we just pointed out, like, it ties in more to himself's film, and how that represents the situation going on between, the Quebecians and the US. Quebecois, sorry. Jesus, they're gonna come after me.
Beckians. Yeah. Um, and I think it's also just pointing out the fact that these two forces think that they're broadly different from one another, but they're
They're
not.
basically yeah, they're doing
Yeah,
the
they're
same
the
thing,
same.
just coming at it from different sides. There was a really I did really like the paragraph at the end of 528, just the prose that's here. Some of the insects flying had multiple pairs of wings and were bioluminescent. They seemed very intent, flying past the outcropping and darting jaggedly off on a course on their way to something urgent. The sound of them, the insects, made Marat think of playing cards and the bicycle spokes of the bicycle of a boy with legs. Both men were silent. This is the time of false dawns. Venus moved east away from them. The softest light imaginable seeped into the desert and spread into the strange tan vistas around them, something heating just below the ring of night. His blanket of the lap was covered in burrs and small spiked seeds of some species. The USA desert began to rustle with life of which most remained hidden. In the American sky, the stars fluttering like banked flames above a low resolution seepage of glow, but none of the pinkening of genuine dawn. Just fucking beautiful writing. I
Yep.
mean,
Yep, absolutely. There's a lot of that in these particular segments
yes.
as the sun starts to come up. So this brings us to Joel Van Dyne and the UHID. What do you what do you think about the UHID? Their whole weird like perspective on masking, honestly, makes my head hurt a little bit. It's
Yeah,
really strange.
it's so self-contradictory,
Yeah.
and I think that's exhibited in the way Joelle is purposefully not answering, Gately's questions and doing it in a very, matter-of-fact kinda way, like, she knows that he's it's not like she's just not catching his intent or he's asking these really kind of obscure questions, like, she knows very well what she's doing, and she's just kinda stringing him along and kind of getting a sort of pleasure from doing it,
Oh, this
and
is
it's
flirting. This whole chapter is them flirting with one another, I
yeah,
think.
yeah. It very much, yes. But as far as, like, the UHID itself, it's I have to imagine if that sort of, intentional contradiction is a sort of way of reestablishing power in a situation where you've had power removed from you. Whatever happened to you that caused your deformity or your hardship or whatever it is, it's essentially a loss of power and an imbalance in that power system that you had. So this is a compensation for doing that. Is this sort of like holier than thou, um, but at the same time, like not going to talk about it kind of attitude towards everything. Like it's really interesting, and I think that there's probably someone who can articulate that way better than I can. But I find the UHD to be a very fascinating group.
Yeah.
And Joel's always been like we've talked about it a bunch. You know, Joel's a fascinating character, and I really, really love her. And I think this whole scene, like I mentioned at the beginning, like this is one of my favorite parts of this section. And I think a lot of it is just because this is that dialogue, that back and forth between them, and that sort of cat and mouse conversation that they have, where it's very much just one person trying to get some genuine, just I want to get to know you better answers. But at the same time, these are very intrusive questions and very personal questions.
Uh-huh.
So it's understandable that Joelle wouldn't want to answer them, but she kind of clearly does want to, but she's going to dance around it a little. It's just beautiful. I love it. It's such a fun scene to read.
Yeah, agreed. There's some interesting stuff with the UHID in the sense that it's almost like they are trying to escape like cycles of shame by effectively covering their shame, and that by
Yes.
covering whatever that shame is, you are escaping feeling it in some ways. I guess like the best way that I can think of to describe it. There's some interesting quotes that I have like highlighted or underlined. We're on 535. It says UHID allows members to be open about their essential need for concealment. In other words, we don the veil. We don the veil and wear the veil proudly and stand very straight and walk briskly wherever we wish, veiled and hidden, and but now completely upfront and unashamed about the fact that how we appear to others affects us deeply, about the fact that we want to be shielded from all sight. UHID supports us in our decision to hide openly. That somehow covering whatever that is gonna make it okay because it's what you're presenting to other people, and that it is something about that like presentation to other people that affects that internality effect, essentially. Like it's another coping mechanism or another way to try and escape it, but you're not actually addressing the root cause of the issue. It feels somewhat like when they're in the Boston AA segment towards the end, and they talk about the two different types of people that speak at AA, the ones who are trying to explain away their addiction, and then ones that are just trying to reckon with like the effects of their addiction in a way. Like there's something in that for me that I can't quite synthesize as far as the similarities between them. But I also like what's listed here on 535 going into 536 that says, but that the cycle becomes annular and insidious if you begin to be ashamed of the fact that being unbright shames you. If you try to hide the fact that you feel mentally inadequate and so go around making jokes about your own dullness and acting as if it didn't bother you at all, pretending you didn't care whether others perceived you as unbright or not. Like, in other words, I think this is some of what Wallace is building about earnestness, that like you need to be able to present these things honestly, at the very least to yourself, and that an acceptance of these things and what they mean to yourself, and not pretending that your emotions are this is getting really abstract, but like a way of trying to explain away your emotions by just saying that they don't bother you effectively, right? Rather than admitting that they bother you and that means something greater about your character is I think maybe the best way they can to explain it. And what this passage really reminds me of is the stuff with Mario later. And of course,
Yes.
like the UHID came to Mario and tried to pitch him on wearing a veil, where Mario is not ashamed of his internal thought process, does not make fun of himself or speak about himself in a self-deprecating manner, and is very earnest and does believe in the power of sincerity, and so therefore is of this elevated position. But unlike some of the other UHID members, is truly unashamed of his position in life, and so doesn't need to don a veil over some sort of sense of disability or disfigurement, if that makes any sense at all.
No, it absolutely does. And I think that hits back to what we've talked about regarding Mario throughout this season. That Mario is maybe the only genuine character in the story. He is the
Yeah.
only one not afraid to hide who he is. He doesn't try to present himself as being something that he's not. He is absolutely just perfectly fine with who he is and where he is in life. And he has no shame about it. He has no reason to feel like he's less than. And I think that what the UHID is doing, I think, is trying to, and I think this is why Mario is such a good sort of foil for them, for lack of a better term. Like they're trying to sort of put themselves on this pedestal of like, oh, we would be stared at if we were at a party and we were not wearing a veil, like, that's kinda what on 534, they're talking about that whole, like, wine tasting party, and how, like, if you went there, you would just feel this need to hide the whole time because everyone would be staring at you, but then they solve that problem by dressing in a manner that makes people stare at them. So they're still creating this problem that they're trying to get, ostensibly trying to get away from by sort of shifting what it is that's being stared at and taking away, like, oh, you're not going to stare at this thing that you might somebody might say is ugly or hideous or whatever, and instead we're going to cover it with something that you're going to stare at because it's beautiful and mysterious and different. But Mario is very much just, I'm just here. Like, this is me. Here I am. I'm just going to do what I need to do. I'm going to hang in his harness over a tennis court and film people because I like doing that. I don't care that that people might make comments about my appearance or that people might have concerns about how others might perceive me. He is just there to be there and to just live his life and not get hung up in all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, agreed. It's really interesting because I think it is getting at, and I think if I'm going to synthesize the AA stuff, I'm going to do it now, maybe. Where if Mario represents the true sort of earnest casting off of that shame versus people just trying to address the shame in a way, that I think maps to the AA stuff in the sense of the people who are trying to say, like, I am an addict because of this, are trying to address the fact that there is something else that they can blame their addiction on or handle their addiction by blaming and dealing with something else, versus somebody who is capable of simply dealing with the fact that they are an addict by dealing with the consequences of their addiction. The consequence of Mario's, deformity or disability or whatever you would want to put is that he has to try harder, and he does. He addresses the consequence of that. He is not looking to cover the origin of it, or utilize the fact of his consequences existence to make his life easier, I guess, is the way that I'm going to connect those two things together, again, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does.
And then again, there's just like a lot of really good banter in this that I think is another thing that Wallace really excels at. Like, and now she's back to talking like a fucking English teacher again. But ignore that. That's not the point. Look at how you're trying to get our dialogue all distracted up in shame, and me, again, instead of saying yes or no to me asking, will you tell me what you're missing behind that veil? Oh, you're good at hiding, Mr. G. You're good. The minute we start to poke at any inadequacies you're ashamed of, see, you drop behind your own protective mask of house staff and start probing areas that you know I can't bring myself to be open about, since you got me to tell you about UHID's philosophy of hiding, so that your own sense of inadequacy gets either buried or used as a backlight to illuminate my own inability to be open and straightforward. The best defense is a good offense, isn't it, Mr. Football Player? Like, there's just a lot of really great banter between the two of them that it is flirting, and obviously as the book goes on there is something of like a romance that builds between these two characters.
But I also love how Gately's genuinely like frustrated also because he's a couple of lines down, he's just like, I'm just asking if I can ask, for Christ's sake. You haven't even answered that question yet. Like, I think it's on 537. And then in the meantime, you still didn't say a straight on yes or no to, can I ask what's up behind there? Are you cross-eyed or have like a beard, or do you have really bad skin under there, even though your skin every place that's hidden looks like it's so. Oh God, I love that scene so much.
And she does eventually answer him.
She does, yeah.
She does on 538.
She just gets to toy with him for a little while.
Yeah, she says, Don, I'm perfect. I'm so beautiful I drive anybody with a nervous system out of their fucking mind. Once they've seen me, they can't think of anything else and don't want to look at anything else and stop carrying out normal responsibilities and believe that if they can only have me right there with them at all times, everything will be all right. Everything. Like I'm the solution to their deep slavering need to be jowl to cheek with perfection. Now with the sarcasm. I am so beautiful, I am deformed. Now with the non-respectful acting out of treating me like I'm stupid for trying to get her to walk through her fear to give a straight out no, which she isn't willing. I am deformed with beauty. You want to see my professional staff face? Here's my professional staff face. I nod and smile. I treat you like somebody I have to humor by nodding and smiling. And behind the face, I'm going with my finger around and around my temple like what a fucking yut. Like where's the net? Believe what you want. I'm powerless over what you believe. I know. See the professional staffer writing in the meds log. 6 extra strong kind aspirin for staff after sarcasm and sideways refusal to walk through fears and sarcastic acting out by newcomer who thinks she knows everybody else's issues. What position did you play? That the staffer wonders how come she's even here in treatment then if she knows so much. It's so funny. It's so
Yeah.
funny. I love it. And of course, like her description of what she does to people is the same as the entertainment.
Uh-huh.
This is key to understanding what the actual movie is. Just keep that in mind as you continue to read.
Yep.
Uh,
She's Medusa in a sort of way.
yeah,
Think
yeah,
about it, yeah.
she turns people to stone. Um, Next we get to Randy Lenz. What did you think of this first section of Randy Lenz, which
Ugh.
basically goes through his routine? And this is, in my mind, this is really about escalation and what the
Yes.
escalation of an addiction looks like. In the
That's
same in the same way we talked about the tattoo thing with
Mhm.
Tiny Yule, how people just put their energy into something else they used to be in their addiction. This is both Lenz doing that, but then also showing how addictive behaviors manifest in anything and how they escalate basically in the same ways. That's really my takeaway of this chapter.
I could not have said it better. That's exactly so as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, knowing knowing what Lenz does, forced me to sort of read around what he does. And in doing that, that's when I kind of clocked the whole escalation thing, and that's exactly what this is. This is how an addiction forms. This is the little experimentation that builds and builds and snowballs, and then you have an avalanche. And it is so well done and so well paced that I think I think this scene is one of the ones for me at least that really, really got so much better on the second reading, because in the first reading, once you understand that he's out there torturing dogs, it it sucks. And it's really kind of all you can focus on. Like everything else kind of becomes this background noise, right? And you're just focused and unable to look away from the depravity of his actions. But when you understand that that's happening and you're coming into it a second time, and you can sort of stand and look at the forest for the trees, for lack of a better term, you can really see how this is examining how people get on this path and how quickly it ratchets up and becomes a huge, huge problem that you have to just kind of keep building on in order to get any kind of satisfaction from it. And it doesn't have to just be this sort of violence against something. It can literally be anything, like we talked about. Addiction can be anything. And as long as you have that self gratification that needs to be fed and that requires more and more to be fed into it each time, that's addiction in a nutshell. It is right there in your face and painfully honest on the page.
Yeah, and it starts out, you also never know where these things are gonna come from. This starts out
Yeah.
innocently, it starts out because Lenz wants to walk home instead of, getting a ride or taking a bus or a taxi or something like that. Like, that's where this begins, and then he as soon as he does it one time, all of a sudden, he's stuck on this new pathway with a new sort of moment of release that he's working towards, which is the most disturbing thing about it for me isn't even what he's doing to the animals. It's the fact that like the moment of release for him isn't that. It's when he looks at the body and says, "There."
Yep.
In this, it's that is the most chilling part of it for me.
Mhm.
Because that also feels pretty real. If this character were to be an actual person doing this in this way.
Yeah. It's a very disturbing, like, almost, yeah, I mean, it's a post-climax action. Like, It's the you've had the dopamine release from it, and normally in a normal, I shouldn't say normal, in a neurotypical brain, perhaps the reaction after that would be remorse, right? Guilt, something to that effect. But for him, it's this sense of completion, and there's your circularity and your self fulfilling sort of action, where now it's going to be a routine now, and it has to adhere to this certain strict structure, but it has to also grow at this time. So it's horrifying. It really is a horrifying thing to read, but it is also so well written that it is weirdly pleasurable to read. Like not the actions that he's doing, but just the description, the way in which it's written really makes it enjoyable, like just on the page.
Well,
It's
and
a
it's
weird
also
thing to say given what he's doing, but
I no, see, I agree with you completely. I'm glad you said what you said because that is a hard thing to cop to essentially because of what's happening on the page. But I think the real genius about that, and when I was thinking about it in regards of like what is it about this segment that is so almost in a perverse way intoxicating to read. It's the fact that even though it's in an omniscient third person, it is from Lenz's perspective, this whole
yeah.
thing. And so it is a way in which the writer is managing to like psychically transfer that feeling of excitement over like a new addiction, a new sort of routine or thing you're engaging in. And then also the like the seduction of the drug use that happens on the top of it and how this new addiction is what's getting you back to your old one, so you're fulfilling something in like a really perverted way to how it used to be. But then also when it gets to 543 where it reveals that he is also using cocaine. It says cocaine ingestion, this occasional and last resort, is such a marked reduction of use and abuse for Lenz that it's a bona fide miracle and clearly constitutes a much miraculous sobriety, as total abstinence would be for another person without Lenz's unique sensitivities and psychological makeup and fucking intolerable daily stresses and difficulty unwinding, and he accepts his monthly chips with a clear conscience and a head unmuddled by doubting. He knows he's sober. Like, the compensation is off the charts,
Yeah.
right? But when you're in an active addiction like that and you're finding, compensation for yourself, it in and of itself feels like a drug. Like when you discover the way to explain this away to yourself.
Mhm.
And so like the feeling that comes across of these chapters, the enjoyment of reading it, I think is imparted by the fact that you are in the headspace of a man who is getting to enjoy his addiction again, just served up a little bit differently while maintaining the appearance of sobriety. Like that in the early stages has to feel amazing. I've never been in that position, but I can only imagine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So most of this, I don't have a ton to put on it beyond that, because a lot of it is just again his escalation. It starts with rats, then it goes to cats, and then it goes to actually like harming the cats before you suffocate them. To then it goes to the first couple times that he's done something with a dog. He's starting to poison food. He's starting to carry a knife. He eventually thinks about a guy being killed when he's inconvenienced. Like, it's just a very clean sort of escalation map in terms of how these things build. I don't have much to say up until 546 when Bruce Green is introduced again.
Yeah, I don't either. I think that whole section is very experiential. I
Yeah,
think that
absolutely.
if any part of this book up to this point is a terrific exercise in experiential writing
Yep.
and reading, it is
Yep.
that right there.
Agreed. Now, eventually, Lenz does this so often and so long, these after meeting walks, that another resident in the house, Bruce Green, notices and starts at first occasionally walking home with Lenz back to Ennet House, but then eventually starts doing it seemingly just about every time that they're at a meeting together. Here's what I find interesting, and this will carry over to the next scene. What I find really impressive about this is that without any acknowledgement on Wallace's part, of putting the subtext into text, it is very clear that what he is trying to articulate is the difference between somebody doing AA and somebody not doing AA. And I don't just mean from the standpoint of sobriety versus active use. What I mean is there are moments in which Randy Lenz talks about how annoyed he is that Bruce Green is going on these walks with him because it's getting in the way of his ability to engage in his substance abuse, which is what I'm just going to call the animal murdering for the sake of this sort of statement. But he also cannot kick Bruce Green away, tell him to stop coming with him, because having that other person there is good for him. What I find interesting is he mentions a couple times in the text, in his internal monologue, of like being pretty reasonably sure that Bruce Green is not suspicious of him, that nobody is suspicious of him, that there's no way they could know what he's up to, and so he doesn't understand why Bruce is there, because he's just fine. No one should suspect him of doing anything. What I find so smart about it is that conundrum that is put forward by Wallace without an expansion on like what it means from a spiritual perspective, I think indicates that like, no, they can tell something's wrong with you. Like which is a big thing that addicts actively in addiction think they're being really sneaky and they're not. But even more than that, they don't need to know what you're engaging in. They don't need to know what you're doing to be concerned about you. And Bruce Green represents this person who is actively trying to get sober, to get clean, and to build a new life for himself and kind of walk the AA steps and dedicate himself to this like active listening and sharing and helping thing that is being hammered into him. And so it's enough that Randy Lenz is doing something different from the crowd alone that he thinks something is wrong and wants to just be there, right? That is an illustration of someone doing this the right way in my mind, of reaching across the aisle, so to speak, to another person, and regardless of understanding what the issue is, being present in case they want to discuss the issue. And even if there is no problem, if it turns out that your hunch is wrong, all you have done is still helped a person feel less alone, right? Like he is an example of that. And Wallace doesn't specifically put that on the text because he trusts the reader, in my opinion, to have picked up on how this works by now, essentially. And it's really a testament to how these things can make a difference in an addict's life, because the very presence of Green for him to just yammer at and just kind of like unload his like stream of consciousness into is enough to effectively curb his behavior. At first, it's because he literally can't engage in it because Bruce is there and he's not going to kill an animal in front of Bruce. But then eventually becomes, I would rather have Bruce here than get to the sort of fix that I need off of this addiction that I've built for myself. Because I could get back to that anytime I want. I just need to actually kick him out, but I don't want to. So it's also a testament to the power of that earnestness and that sincerity and that seeking to help somebody else or to reach across to somebody else, how that can affect somebody, in this case, an active addiction, but in many ways. And Wallace does all of that in gestures. It's never subtext made text, which I find so impressive about the kind of dual Randy Lenz segments of this chunk of the book.
Yeah, I think the introduction of Bruce Green definitely it like you said, it helps to I guess ground Randy in a way and provide him that outlet. But at the same time, we see at the end of the scene that it's also not 100% effective, because he does find the baby bird that he ends up sneaking and dumping down the garbage disposal. So it like,
yes,
I think his presence there, Bruce Green's presence there, definitely curbs the worst of Randy's impulses, but I think that those impulses are still so strong that he can't fully break away from them yet. But if anything, Bruce is giving him that sort of window of hope of like, maybe if I put a little effort into it, I can get out of this.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that inclusion of the whole thing with the bird is also in and of itself Wallace turning the dial again, of being like, I'm going to make this a little bit more complicated. Because you're right, it is that latent desire still spilling out because he hasn't, as they would put it, sort of in AA speak, like surrendered yet.
Mhm.
But also it represents a continuing escalation because he's not doing it in private anymore.
Mhm.
He's finding an animal that's near Ennet House and doing it in the building where there are a lot of other people.
Yeah, and it
And
doesn't give him the same satisfaction that he's had previously.
yeah, and it it is something that doesn't give him that satisfaction because it doesn't fit within that, as you put it, like standard routine that we've talked about in a lot of different things. But it's also really smart because it mirrors what's going on with Hal. That Hal would
Mhm.
smoke his one hitter in the pump room in secret, and the secrecy was part of it. And there was this like special part of his routine that needed to be in place in order for him to get the pleasure he was looking for. And then by the time we get to the eschaton scene, the addiction has sort of progressed and escalated to the point where he is smoking in public in front of other people. And what comes of that is the disaster of the eschaton sequence and the fact that he is not able to intervene. So it's another case where Wallace is showing how addictions in general function. That even if it's not as severe as hurting animals, you're on the same kind of general sort of roller coaster track. It's just served up a little bit differently. So we go from subtle characterization to unsubtle characterization with Rodney Tyne measuring his own dick every single day.
Ugh.
Which just like he's such a sort of almost like a Pinchonian bureaucratic character.
Yeah.
Like Rodney Tyne is cut from the same cloth as Brock Vaughn in
Oh,
terms of,
absolutely.
like what they represent, right? Like it's on the nose that like the guy with the sort of secret power behind the throne of America measures his own dick every single morning. Like
Mhm.
that is not subtle, but is very effective for telling you what kind of guy this is. But then there's like the little Wallaceisms of like he has a travel ruler that he
Yep.
brings with him, so that it's always the same measurement, or at least he knows it's on the same scale. And then I also do love the reveal that Johnny Gentle had to be like aggressively persuaded from watching the entertainment
Yeah.
himself as soon as it word got out that there was this thing that existed. And as a disclaimer from a previous episode, when we were talking about the Near Eastern medical attaché, like the way that people kept rushing into the house until there was like 17 of them, that's actually from this chunk where it talks about the police officer and then like the sergeant and then like the watch commander and then like a bunch of other people kept going to the house until they cut the power. I mistakenly thought that was happening earlier in the book with the medical attaché, but the whole history of kind of like the individual reports of where the entertainment has been and what it has done are really funny. I love that segment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the fact that Gentle wanted to watch it and had to get talked out of it because that was hilarious to me.
I underlined that and just wrote Trump in the
Yeah.
margin because you just know that he would be like, "Whoa, what's the big deal?"
Yeah, yeah.
You have anything you want to add on the fact that Rodney Tyne has come to Boston?
I don't. It's a very short, like, page and 3/4. Um, but yeah, he's very Pinchonian. I think you're dead on in that.
Yeah. So for this scene with Pemulis, I have a proposition for you.
Oh, okay.
That starting on page 522, with "He could never resist," down to the end where it switches scenes. I say that we just do another one of our little sort of one act plays where one of us
Yeah,
reads the description and the other does Pemulus's dialogue.
let's do it.
Because I feel like that's really all you need to know. All you need to know.
Yeah,
Do you
right.
want to you want to be action descriptions or do you want to be
I'll
Pemulus?
I'll do the descriptions.
Okay.
All right. He could never resist biting down once a mint had melted to a certain size and texture. The doorless dean of academic affairs office was a blazing rectangle of light. The light didn't spill very far into the reception area, however. At close range, sounds issued from the office, but not exactly words. Pemulis checked his fly and snapped his fingers under his own nose and assumed a business-like stride and rapped firmly on the doorless jamb without breaking stride. The heavier blue shag of the office itself slowed him down a bit. He stopped once he was all the way in. 18A John Wayne and Hal's Wumsley were both in the front of the office. They were about maybe 2 meters apart. The room was lit overhead and by 4 standing lamps. The seminar table and chairs cast a complicated shadow. 2 homemade pom-poms of shredded paper and what looked like the amputated handles of wooden tennis rackets were on the seminar table, which was otherwise bare. John Wayne wore a football helmet and light shoulder pads and a Russell athletic supporter and socks and shoes and nothing else. Sorry, I knew that was coming. I was trying to get out. He was down in the classic 3-point stance of U.S. football. Ink's incredibly tall and well-preserved mother, Dr. Avril Incandenza, wore a little green and white cheerleader's outfit and had one of DeLint's big brass whistles hanging around her neck. She was blowing on the whistle, which appeared to be minus the little inside pellet because no whistling sound resulted. She was about 2 meters from Wayne, facing him, doing near splits on the heavy shag, one arm up and pretending to blow the whistle while Wayne produced the classic low-register growling sounds of U.S. football. Pemulis had made rather a show of pushing the bumpkin-billed yachting hat back to scratch his head, blinking. Mrs. Ink was the only one looking at him.
Probably won't even waste anybody's time asking if I'm interrupting,
Pemulis said. Mrs. Ink seemed frozen in place. Her one hand was still up in the air, fine fingers splayed. Wayne craned his neck to look over at Pemulis from under his helmet without changing his 3-point stance. The football noises trailed off. Wayne's got a narrow nose and close-set, witchy eyes. He wore a plastic mouthguard. The musculature of his legs and buttocks was clearly outlined as he squatted forward with his weight on his knuckles. There was way less time passing in the office than there seemed to be.
Hoping for a second of your time,
Pemulis told Mrs. Ink. He was standing schoolboy straight, hands clasped demurely over his fly, which on Pemulis the posture did look insolent. Wayne straightened up and moved towards his clothing with no little indignity. His sweats were neatly folded on the dean's desk at the rear of the office. The mouthguard was attached to the face mask and hung from it when removed. The chin strap had several snaps Wayne had to undo.
Nice looking helmet,
Pemulis told him. Wayne, pulling hard at his sweatpants cuffs to fit them over his shoe, didn't reply. He was so fit that his supporter's straps didn't even dent his buttocks. Mrs. Incandenza removed the mute whistle. She was still split down on the floor. Pemulis made a rather show of not looking south of her face. She pursed her lips to chuff hair out of her eyes.
I predict this will take 2 minutes at most,
Pemulis said, smiling.
He's such a piece of shit.
It really is.
But I love him. I love how evil this teenager is. It's not enough for you to catch the administrator sleeping with one of the kids in a very bizarre role play scenario.
Yes.
But you have to like really milk it and really explore the space of the room and crack jokes about the costumes and pretend like nothing crazy's going on. He's such a piece of shit.
Just the fact that he's standing there like perfect posture.
Yeah.
With his hands around his fly, just like, yep. I just need a minute of your time.
Oh man. It's so good. And of course there's also this other aspect of the fact that like when you've read this book already and you kind of know the situation that Pemulis is about to find himself in from an academic perspective and expulsionary perspective, that like when you read through it at least a second time, you're like, oh, this fuck's gonna get away with it because he was the one who showed up in the office and like witnessed this instead of anyone else.
Uh-huh. But it had to be him. He's a perfect character to walk in on this particular thing happening.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other crazy thing, the whole scenario is crazy enough as it is, but they're doing it while Tavis is still at work next door in his office working on the stair blaster, and Avril's office has no door. So they're not even hiding in any way what they're doing. Yeah, it's so absolutely crazy. But it's such a fun, just like little moment in the book. So then we flash back over to Lenz and Green, and um, I don't have much to say on it other than the stuff that I had already mentioned earlier, up to when it switches POVs later. But essentially, Lenz has decided to finally tell Bruce Green that he needs to go somewhere else, that he needs to find another way to spend his evenings. And so, to help himself kind of get the confidence to do that, he decides to do some coke at an AA meeting, which is another level of degenerate.
Mhm.
Um, and then he's going to tell him once they're sort of out on their walk. However, the problem is the way that he experiences cocaine hydrolysis, that uptake into the bloodstream, and the kind of physical effects of it, which are described in detail. And if I don't know if you've ever been on coke, Cody,
I have
but
not.
this section describes perfectly what it's like to be on coke.
I imagine
Um,
so.
in a way that is like pretty impressive to me. Um, and that one of the things that happens with Lenz in particular is he gets really chatty as a way to try and like engage effectively his jaw so that he doesn't grind his teeth. And so before he can do anything about it, he ends up just yammering for sentences and paragraphs and pages worth of time instead of actually doing what he took the coke to do, which of course supports the further argument that like he is not doing this out of sobriety, that his delusions that are articulated in the previous section are indeed delusions. You don't have to be worried about that. And this is where I get into the idea of like, if we're analyzing the things that Wallace does well, kind of like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, in terms of he's really good at the character details. He's really good at building out his characters. He's good at introducing complexity that helps to reshape the understanding of a scene or a character in the reader's head. Those are all things he's good at. This is such an example of like how he was able to take the experimental work of his avant-garde and postmodern influences and make it a little bit palatable. Feels like too extreme of a word to use, but to make it more engaging to the reader. Like, I'll give you an example of this. There's a book that was published last year, called Schadenfreude. It's a big translated title that I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you have at least heard
Familiar
of
with it?
at some point. Yeah, it's this long, untranslated, really dense German novel that Deep Vellum footed the bill on a translation for by Max Lawton. There's a section of Schadenfreude that is just the names of all the victims of the Dresden firebombing written out. That is an experimental thing to do in
Yeah.
terms of like composing a book. And there's a purpose to that. And I'm not trying to say that it doesn't work in the book or that there isn't a satisfaction that you get out of reading that, and that the point Michael Lenz was trying to make in making the reader go through that doesn't, land. All of that is true. But that is going to be a lot harder to engage with in terms of experimentation and abstraction than what Wallace does. And so it's really a case where Wallace is taking some of the influences of that avant-garde tradition that he viewed himself as coming out of with this book in particular, and reformatting it in a way that is going to have a broader appeal while still being experimental. Now, what do I mean by this? There are several pages in this section that are just declarative statements of what Randy is telling to Bruce, just over and over and over again. Just like paragraphs upon paragraphs that say, Randy says, Randy said, Randy told, Randy regaled, where it's just these different things. It's not dialogue. It's not a conversation. It is a descriptive retelling of the things that Randy is just spewing out at Bruce in his cocaine addled state. And it is experimental because that is not a normal way of writing a scene. It is a way in which he is changing it from the kind of accepted norm of how these things go. But it has the additional layer of experimentation and abstraction in that it is capturing, again, the mind state of what it is like to be on coke. Like, Ken Airdetty's anxiety in the beginning of this book captures the feeling of being that anxious about something incredibly well just by you reading it. Kate Gompert's description of experiencing depression captures what that's like really well. He does this a lot, where the way in which he chooses to format and write a scene actually transfers the experience that a character is having to the reader. And this is, as someone who has done more cocaine than I feel comfortable with in my life, what it feels like. That is how a lot of people get on that. And so to see that transposed in a way in the text that is felt by the reader, but that at no point feels like, oh, this is pretty experimental, in the way that some of the other sort of avant-garde writers that would have influenced Wallace can be, is really just, again, another masterstroke of his particular style of writing. Where I'm like, is there anything that this person can't do or is not good at? It's pretty few and far between the things that he fails at.
Yeah, and it is, like I said, as someone who has not done that, I still get the feeling that this is a pretty accurate description of what it's like.
Yeah.
And it is much more, I think, accessible to the sort of everyday reader, to come into this and to engage with it. And I think that this is one of those things where when you see this wall of text, for example, and you don't have any context about what it's about, you've never really engaged with it, like, it can be intimidating. But when you realize how easy to read it is, despite its length and its apparent complexity, it is essentially pretty easy to read, and it reads in such a way that it is upping your own, I don't want to say it like ups your heart rate, but it gives you that sense of tension that I would imagine comes with cocaine use, of like that sort of ramped up um heartbeat and the sense of like constant movement. You feel that. It feels very much like that, like on the road or something, one of the sort of very stream of conscious kind of things where it's, just it continually in motion and
Yeah.
constantly going. And that's highlighted in the fact that he talks about him not taking a breath between, except for like once a block or something like that, because he's just going and going and going and going.
Yep. Yep. It's so brilliantly done. And the way that he does this kind of experimentative writing is subtle in a way that I really appreciate. Which is not to say that those more extreme things don't have their place, but it's, if you're going to be doing it as consistently as he is, especially for as sustained of a pace as he is over the course of a book this length, um, that subtlety, I think, is far more effective in still getting a reader to remain engaged. I do. I don't really have much to say about the scene where Hal is just like laying on his bed, full from lunch, other than I love the description. Over 200 breaths later, John N.R. Wayne opened up the ajar door a little more and put his whole head in and stayed like that, with just his head in. He didn't say anything, and Hal didn't say anything, and then they stayed like that for a while. And then Wayne's head smoothly withdrew.
It's such a great image to have. It really is so good.
The last thing that I'll say too about the stuff with Randy Lenz before we get into the beginning of his own comeuppance is, if you don't believe, or if you do believe that some of the stuff he's saying while he's whacked out on coke is true, it's not. He's yammering nonsense, basically. And that is best indicated by the fact that in a later section he is going to say that the people who wear the veils, like Joel, wear them because they all have a cyclops eye in the middle of their forehead, which, like, we know that is not true. That is not true. And so it is a case where, like, if you're looking for a confirmation of his unreliability in this state, that is a very easy one to point to.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's what you said earlier. Like, he's just talking, so he's not grinding teeth. So he's just gonna say whatever bullshit comes into his head.
After this next scene of Bruce Green and Randy Lenz retreated to a fun set of conversations that Gately has in his sort of day-to-day job. I love these different bits that he puts in there of just like, here's the things you're gonna hear while sitting in the office of like this location or whatever.
Uh-huh,
Just like
uh-huh.
these are the kinds of discussions that he has to have. Like the whole like I don't want to rat, but I kind of have to rat because this is like actually like really bad and it's bad for a number of reasons. And so therefore, because of how bad it is, I need you to tell me that it's okay that I'm ratting on this person.
Uh-huh.
Like that whole back and forth that happens is really great.
Yeah.
It's it's really great, and in that there's another sort of little bit of a flirtatious thing between him and Joelle, where they're talking about their dads. It ends with "Kiss my rosy red ass, maybe. Remind me to log how it's real positive to see you coming out of this shell of yours."
I
I
like
really, yeah, I
that
like
he
them.
is trying to break a Bostonian of the, Bostonian accent by getting him to say hard right. Hard. Hard. Sound it out.
And then some psychopath allowed Randy Lenz to become a sponsor.
Oh god, yeah.
Is the last one, and he's just doing unspeakable shit to this person who's a sponsee.
You've been using Randy Lenz for a sponsor?
And then he just ends with Jesus. All right. Orin has sex. That's basically what happens in this next
Yeah.
scene. But there is an important footnote within that. Do you have anything else? We kind of already talked a
We
little bit
talked
about.
about it earlier
Yeah.
when we talked about Avril. Yeah, I don't think I have anything else to add to it. It's again, that's one of those things that I think it's you just have to kind of read it and come away with your own impression of how she is, but it does a pretty good job of evidencing that. I do think it's funny that it's that's brought up while he's mid coitus,
Yeah.
but
And the fact that he seemingly has sex with this woman just out of sexual frustration for not having been able to have sex with
yeah.
Steeply. That man
So
is
he has a
so
fantasy
far gone.
he has to remember an interview he had with Steeply. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. Idris Arslanian decides to wear a blindfold to
Uh,
play tennis. I love the description of just how bad his first couple matches were. He would just sit there and then find that he was often facing the like complete wrong direction when he would turn the blindfold like up on his head to check where he was. And just the whole way that again Pemulis is just messing with him through this whole conversation by extending it out longer than he wants to. It's so funny. There's so much like great like almost sort of 1940s screwball comedy like patter going on in these chapters between these
uh-huh.
characters.
And in the middle of it all is Lyle having an absolute feast off of
Yeah.
Anton Duquette.
Because he's worried about trying to be able to pass a class, and
Yeah.
this is the way in which Wallace contrives a way to talk about like how the annular fusion system works. That like we know what it is in principle, we know sort of the origin point of it with the whole mattress thing, and now this is sort of the actual mechanics of it. Um, as far as I could tell, this is pure science fiction. That there is
Oh
nothing
yeah.
even grounding this even close to reality. But it is really funny in that effectively like yes, they're stuck in a cycle of toxifying and detoxifying the earth over and over and over again. And it's just this one segment of the country. But the thing that I was really reminded of on this read is it's basically before they irradiate the hell out of it to fuel the next step of annulation. It's basically Area X from Jeff Vandermeer's Southern
Holy
Reach
shit. I
books.
hadn't even thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah, especially like the here on 573 it says hence the eastern concavity of anxiety and myth. You end up with a surrounding environment so fertilely lush it's practically unlivable. A rainforest on anabolic steroids. Close enough. Therefore, rapacious feral hamsters and insects of Volkswagen size and infantile gigantism and unmacheteable regions of forests of the mythic eastern concavity. Yeah, ours, and you find you need to keep steadily dumping in toxins to keep the uninhabited ecosystem from spreading and overrunning more ecologically stable areas, exhausting the atmosphere's poison so that everything hyperventilates, and thus and such. So this is why EWD's major catapulting is from metro area due north. So, like, if they were to leave it alone, it would spread in the same way that Area X does in those books.
That's a good connection. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I wonder if that wasn't at least a partial sort of inspiration there. I can't imagine fucking working in the eastern concavity. Like, these facilities that they're generating the power for, someone presumably works there. At least like a couple people presumably
There
work
has to be a
there.
couple of bodies in there, yes.
And so, like, what is life for those people like? That's gonna be fucking insane. Part of
That
your
would be a good, like, fan fiction kind of story off on the side of, like, with the day-to-day lives of these people. It's like 4 or 5 people.
part of your like month or whatever, you live in like a perfect unspoiled Edenic landscape with crazy wildlife in it, and then giant catapults hurl bins of nuclear waste overhead until all of that is dead. That's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And then, in case you needed a reminder of just how shitty Pemulis is, he, as payment for explaining this sort of annular process to the kid, he says, "Give me your urine." He's already collecting for the next drug test period.
Such a sleazy douche.
So crazy. And so now this is where we go back to Randy Lenz. And we learn some background behind Lenz's family, particularly his mother, who who got so fat that she died in a recliner.
Stuck in the window of a bus.
Yes, it's I guess maybe we should just read it. Mrs. Lenz right in the process of going potty.
Yeah, that's probably the best place.
Probably, yeah.
576.
Yep, and then I guess I can read to the paragraph break on 577, and then you can finish it from there.
Yeah.
Mrs. Lenz, right in the process of going potty, was hurled from the toilet by the first swerve and proceeded to do some high velocity and human waste flinging pinballing back and forth against the body's plastic walls. And when the bus finally regained total control and resumed course, Mrs. Lenz had, freakishly enough, ended up her human pinballing with her bare and unspeakably huge backside wedged tight in the open window of the potty, so forcibly ensconced into the receptacle that she was unable to extricate. And the bus continued on its northward sojourn the rest of the way up 24, with Mrs. Lenz's bare backside protruding from the ensconcing window, prompting car horns and derisive oratory from other vehicles. And Mrs. Lenz's plaintive shouts for help were unavailed by the passengers that were arising back up off the floor and rubbing their sore noggins and hearing Mrs. Lenz's mortified screams from behind the potty's locked reinforced plastic door. But were unable to extricate her because the potty's door locked from the interior by sliding across a deadbolt that made the doors outside say occupied, occupado, occupe, and the door was locked, and Mrs. Lenz was wedged beyond the reach of arm length and couldn't reach the deadbolt no matter how plaintively she reached out her mammoth fat waddled arm. And like fully 88% of all clinically obese Americans, Mrs. Lenz was diagnosed clinically claustrophobic and took prescription medication for anxiety and ensconcement phobias, and she ended up successfully filing a 7-figure lawsuit against Greyhound Lines and the almost defunct Commonwealth Highway Authority for psychiatric trauma, public mortification, second-degree frostbite, and received such a morbidly obese settlement from the Dukakis-appointed 18th Circus Civil Court that when the check arrived in an extra long envelope to accommodate all the zeros, Mrs. L lost all will to data process or cook or clean or nurture or finally even move, simply reclining in a custom-designed 1.5-meter wide recliner watching interlaced gothic romances and consuming mammoth volumes of high-lipid pastry brought on gold trays by a pastry chef she'd put at her individual 24-hour disposal and outfitted with a cellular beeper. Until 4 months after the huge settlement, she'd ruptured and died. Her mouth so crammed with peach cobbler the paramedics were hapless to administer CPR, which Lenz says he knows, by the way, CPR. Oh man.
Oh,
It's so funny.
that scene had me cracking up too.
Again, just more of the like vaudeville
Yeah.
kind of humor in these pages, which is great. So he and I also love the later detail that like the reason he's in sort of dire straits in life and the reason he became a drug dealer is because when her mom or when his mom died, she didn't leave any money to him. She left money to all of the pastry chefs that like furnished her diet in her
living it up
last
now.
days. Yeah, they all got so much money that they retired to like vacation resorts and beaches all across the world. Oh man, it's so funny. And there's just really great stuff in this section about Bruce Green as well. I'm trying to think of when this really kind of starts. Oh yeah, he goes to take a piss. There's another really excellent transfer of sort of perspective, just like we had with the Antitois in the last episode we did, where it goes from Gately to the Antitois perspective. Here it goes from Lenz to Bruce, where Lenz goes to kind of piss in an alleyway somewhere, and Bruce stops to kind of cover his back, so to speak, like not to make sure that anyone is watching or comes up on him. And from there, we're like firmly back in Bruce Green's head. And this is the first time we've really had like a significant amount of time with Bruce Green. He was introduced earlier in the book in context of his relationship with Mildred Bonk, if you remember that. And then he's brought up again as having a tattoo that says Mildred Bonk and like an American traditional heart. And now here we get to actually learn sort of significantly more about him. What do you think about Bruce Green as a character? Because I find him really compelling as Wallace writes him in these next few pages.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think his ability to sort of like key in on his surroundings to an almost like superhuman degree. There's a line on 578 where it says, if you close your eyes on a busy urban sidewalk, the sound of everybody's different footsteps, all put together sounds like something getting chewed on by something huge and tireless and patient. And then there's a couple more kind of instances like that where it talks about this. He has this like ability to really gather what's around him, but then I also just remembered that his dad was on Buns of Steel, which for readers who might be a little too young for that, was quite the craze back in the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah.
And then his own mom's demise was a particularly interesting way to go as well. Where she was she had a heart attack because his dad convinced him to wrap up a can of I think it was can of snakes is what they used to be called. That when she opened it set off and gave her a heart attack. Which
kills his mom with a gift.
Which his dad thought she was just messing with him. That's the best part on 580. For the first couple minutes, Mr. Green thinks she's putting them on, and he keeps rating her performance on an Acme interdepartmental 1 to 8 gag scale until he finally gets pissed off and starts saying she's drawing the gag out for too long, that she's going to scare their little Brucey who's sitting there under the swinging crystal, wide-eyed and silent. Wallace has such a good ability to write these really dark scenes in a very comic way.
Yeah.
And it typically involves like familial death.
Yep.
But it's very it is a skill that I wish I had to be able to kind of crack that tension like that.
Yeah, like agreed. And I mean he does it again as it like escalation is kind of a theme of these chapters too, because like there's this situation that happens with his dad and his mom, where his mom dies, and then his dad goes fucking crazy
Mhm.
and starts. And I the way it's written here is also really amazing. Where it says, "Whose one encouraging sign of holding some tattered remnants of himself together after the funeral had been the fact that he still went faithfully every day to work at Acme Inc. Had gone in and packed a totally random case of the company's outgoing Blammo cigars with vengefully lethal tetrol-based high explosives, and a VFW, 3 Rotarians, and 24 Shriners had been grotesquely decapitated across southeastern Ohio before the federal ATF traced the grisly forensic fragments back to Bruce Green Sr.'s Sanity Blammo lab in Waltham, and then the extradition and horribly complex sanity hearing and trial and controversial sentencing, and then the appeals and death watch and lethal injection. Like he's doing the escalation thing again
Mhm.
for this character's like backstory of tragedy, right? Which all leads to an inflection point explaining like his fear of Polynesian music, basically. It's he is, to your point, he's balancing that darkness and that humor in a way that sort of nobody else can, other than like Lynch. Like this is all
Yeah,
very
yeah.
Lynchian stuff to me. And I think that it's telling that Wallace was like a very big fan of Lynch and maybe gave the only good description of what Lynchian means that like anybody has ever given.
Yeah.
Have you seen that segment from his Charlie Rose appearance where he spells out what Lynchian
You
means?
I think you brought that up when we talked about Lynch, when
Yeah.
after he passed.
He basically says to Charlie Rose, Charlie Rose asks him what Lynchian, or he says, I asked David Lynch what it meant to be Lynchian, and he didn't have a good answer for me. And Wall said, yeah, he probably just like sort of blinked at you slowly. And he describes Lynch as like the connection between the evil and the banal in a sort of like a Norman Rockwell way. And then he goes on to say like what would be Lynchian is if the police have been called to a house where a woman has been murdered, and when they arrive, the woman is on the floor and she's dressed in a very like 1950s housewife style, and her bouffant is perfectly undisturbed as her body lies on the kitchen floor. And when the police interrogate the husband, he not only admits to murdering his wife, but that he murdered her because she was somehow deficient in her wifely duties by ordering Jif peanut butter instead of Skippy peanut butter, and that it would be Lynchian if the cops in some way would find themselves agreeing with the husband that even though he had committed murder, he had done so for at least something that made sense. Um, that's all very tied up with a lot of the humor in here, where there is, because he always used to talk about how like people thought that he wrote a really funny book and that made him upset, and he felt like he wrote a really sad book. And I think that's what he really straddles the line in a lot of this stuff. Is it's like it's not only dark, but it is also sad. Like a lot of
Mhm.
this is built around tragic circumstances of familial death, like you're saying, or something akin to that. All right. And then there's also just some more really great environmental writing. There's a line here on 583 that made me upset at how good it was. Where it says, "His jacket creaks with every step. The temperature is steadily dropping. The fenced front yards are the toy and beer can strewn type where brown grass grows in uneven tufts, and the leaves haven't been raked and are piled in wind-blown lines of force along the base of the fence, and unpruned hedges and overflow wastebaskets and untwisted trash bags are on the sagging porch because nobody's gotten around to taking them down to the EWD dumpster at the corner, and garbage from the overflow receptacles blows out into the yard and mixes with the leaves along the fence's base, and some gets out into the street and is never picked up and eventually becomes part of the composition of the street. A non-peanut M&M box is intaglioed into the concrete of the sidewalk under green. So bleached by the elements, it's turned bone white, and is only barely identifiable as a non-peanut M&M box, for instance. And, looking up from the identifying the M&M boxes make, Green now espies Randy Lenz. Like, that is there's a lot of stuff like that in these pages that is
Mhm.
very evocative of what it is like to walk around in a metropolitan area at night, or just a neighborhood at night. Like, the that feeling of sort of night walking, I guess is the way that I'm gonna put it,
Yeah,
is very accurately captured in these scenes. Like, I definitely know what this feels like. I can feel the kind of chill of being outside where it's a little too cold, but not cold enough that you wanna stay inside, and just kind of kicking through the random garbage and leaves that are on the ground. It's so perfect in its pictorial imagery in a way that is very Wallesian, I think. Like, it isn't just an M&M box, it's a non-peanut M&M box.
mhm, mhm.
Um, and, describing how it's lost its color due to the elements and all of that. Like, it's just such really, really, really good stuff. I feel like I'm just repeating myself over and over again this episode, but there are so many elements present in these pages in particular, like I kind of started off the episode talking about, that really speak to me as distinctly Wallesian in their composition, and seeing them all together is just such a pleasure once you've experienced his writing at least once.
Definitely. And I think I have to backtrack my statement from the beginning of the episode when I said that there was not as much remarkable about this section as others, because I find, and this it's the same anytime we talk about a book, whether it's Against the Day or any of the Pinch on books, or it's this one. Like, I always end up coming into an episode or discussion kind of feeling one way, and I feel like every time by the end of our recording, I'm like, wow, I missed so much. Like, I felt like I got a lot of it, but everyone else brought up all these other great points that I just missed or didn't think about, and it's great. It's part of what makes this book so much more enjoyable, and it's part of what makes talking about books so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. That has happened to me a lot, especially the older I've gotten.
Yeah,
I would say, like, and I don't think it's necessarily just the sort of requisite, "Oh, I'm young and I know everything" kind of attitude of certainty from when I was younger, but I think also it's just the more widely read you become, not even necessarily just in stuff like Infinite Jest. You could spend your lifetime just reading stuff like this, and that wouldn't necessarily be, like, a mistake, but I think the more widely you read across into other things, and other genres and other formats or whatever the case may be, the more exposure you get to a variety of experiences you can have in literature that then find a way to inform other experiences you've had, or that in needing to open yourself up to them, it requires you to kind of build a new gear in your engine, so to speak, to process that, and that is often done through comparative literature, or um, just thinking and conversing about it with people who might even know that better than you. Like, it is such a rewarding experience to have your mind changed through the process of communicating about a book, or reading about a book, and not even maybe changed, maybe just expanded or reminded. It's something that has happened to me a lot, I'd say, in the last 3 years, I guess, kinda since we started doing this
yeah,
podcast.
yeah.
Um, that's been really like a real highlight of my reading as of late. The thing that really kind of set me off on how much I love the Lenz stuff in this section is actually from 284, though, where Green has started to watch Randy Lenz and he's trying to piece together, like, what Randy's up
Mhm,
to.
mhm.
And what really stuck out to me here was the way in which he identifies where the music that has this childhood association with him, and this tragic association with his childhood, sets him off. He starts finding the source of it, and then once he's in there, he is reminded of another memory, like in a very. I'm reading the third volume of Proust right now, because I do that at the start of summer every year. Like, I read the next one in the sequence, and so I got a lot of Proustian sense memories on the brain at this particular time. But the way in which Green continues to have these Proustian sense memories of like, I hear this music, it reminds me of this thing. I look into this house and I see these people gathered around a keg. I think it says here on page 284. How does he describe it? Uh, Window speakers with the oozing quality of large group chemical fun and dancing and social intercoursing. That reminds him of this party that he went to that was Hawaiian themed as well. And it brings up this very deep memory clearly within Bruce's past and within this idea of his ability to like focus on a single thought for a minute. He focuses on this single memory that he has of that party and how this was such a pivotal moment in his addiction in particular and how it really indicated to him how this party ended for him, that he was headed in a really negative direction. And it is also simultaneously a revelation about the reasons why Mildred Bonk left him. Because if you remember from the beginning of the book, he says that Mildred just like cheated on him with a guy and left with him, and that it was completely sudden and unexpected, and he didn't know what to do about it. It just made no sense. But now, deeper into his sobriety, he has recovered a memory like Gately talks about in the extended Boston AA segment that reminds him of the fact that no, that is not what happened. What happened is I drank too much at a party because I got too self-conscious about not understanding the environment I was in. And I got so drunk I shat myself. I had to run out of the apartment. I had to abandon Mildred there, and she was lost and confused, and this set us on a path of mistrust that led to the end of the relationship. That reveal showing up fucking 600 pages into this book
Mhm.
as the final sequence in a series of sequences that builds to you understanding what is happening here, that it isn't just a witnessing of a party happening. It isn't just a witnessing of Randy Lenz killing a dog. It isn't just, a night that's sort of going astray. It is actually an illustration of the recovery of those memories when you were undergoing sobriety that build to having sort of a step forward in your recovery and understanding the person that you were. Indicating that, setting that up over the course of 600 pages, and then delivering that to the reader, to a character that they, before this segment began, did not know that well, is so mind-blowing to me that, like, even just recounting it here now in the way that I have no clue how you even come close to approaching doing something like that in a book. And it's something that I love Pynchon. I've never seen him do something like that. That isn't to say that it's needed in his books or that his books aren't incredibly impressive in a different way, but this feels like such, again, a distinctly Wallace thing that he was doing here. And I know this isn't a Pale King podcast, but I really feel like you could see the seeds of him doing that again in the Pale King with this comparison of all of these like children and these interconnected stories that they eventually end up growing up to be IRS people, that like this was clearly a method of writing that Wallace was interested in cultivating and that he really succeeded with in Infinite Jest. And it feels so specific to this book and this writer to me that I just had a moment where I was blown away in my chair and I just like had to stop and kind of consider how he crafted this book in so specific of a way and the work that took, especially in what feels like a relatively short amount of time for I think most people undertaking a project like this. And then of course the second thought is how fucking crazy it is that this book won 0 awards the year that it came out.
That's so insane.
Anyway, that's my really long spiel on Bruce Green watching a party happen. And
Yeah,
of
I
course,
have nothing to add to that. I just yeah.
Yeah, it's I don't know, man. I think this Wallace guy's pretty good at what he does.
He's a smart one.
Yeah. Um, and of course, Lenz gets busted, uh, killing this dog with a knife, and the party breaks up, and people begin to chase after him into the night. And that brings us to the end of the sort of Bruce Green and Randy Lenz saga. For now, it will get picked up again, and the climax of where that picks up, um, is a segment of the book that I kind of am never not thinking about, like just in my day to day life. At some point, I will think of that scene where Don shows up and what happens happens. We got an email about not spoiling things. So I'm doing my best to talk around it. But yeah, that whole scene in the driveway, it is like one of the best 40-page moments in any book I've ever read, and just especially with how it ends with Don still like staggering forward, just going like, "You owe me piss, you owe
Mhm.
me piss, Lenz." Like, it's oh, I, I'm getting emotional just thinking about it.
It's wild to think, and I'm not gonna I am not gonna spoil anything here, but it's wild to think that we're at the 600-page mark by the end of this episode, and in my recollection of the book, this is the last like 200 pages is where it really ramps up.
Yep.
Like, not to say that it hasn't already been, but the last like 200 pages of this book was, I remember I could not put the book down. I think I spent the entire day just
Yeah.
reading to the end. It was so good.
Yep. That is absolutely. There's two books that really stand out for me that have done that for me. The first was the last of the first three Girl with the Dragon tattoo books, the Millennium books.
Yeah.
Girl Who Kicked the
Yeah.
Hornet's Nest, that ends that whole.
Yes.
I read, I think, the back 75% of that book all in the same day, and then pretty much that same portion of Infinite Jest that you're talking about. I just was basically from the hospital stuff to the
Yep.
end
Yep.
was all really. I just I need to get through this. I need to know what happens. Type of
Mhm.
writing, which is amazing. Anyway, that's a real quick preview for some of you folks that haven't read this book before. Now we kind of are closing up, and we close up with a short little chapter that takes place from Mario's perspective, where he is dealing with insomnia because of the fact that Madame Psychosis still is not on the air, and so he likes to walk at night. And sometimes he walks down to Enid House. He's been inside Enid House twice, we figure out, and he hears Joelle speaking and presumes that it is an old Madam Psychosis broadcast that somebody has recorded. And so this is, if I'm not mistaken, the first time that we're ever actually like in Mario's head. That all of the stuff involving him prior is from an outside perspective. Like
Mhm.
even the Millicent Ken stuff is narrated from the perspective, like if you were to ask Mario about his first and only remotely romantic interaction, it would be. It's not, in his point of view. This is the
Right.
first time, and I'll be honest with you. We've been having a really interesting email correspondence with Xander on Mario. After I read this section, the first thing I thought of was that correspondence that we've had back and forth with Xander over the
Mhm.
past couple months, where we were talking about, and some of the other people also wrote in of Mario as like a holy fool type, or Xander talking about whether or not he was in a good position or not because he could be so easily taken advantage of. All those kind of questions that have come up over it. And what I think really is revealed in this chunk, which I didn't want to spoil as we were kind of going through the book, is that Mario is fully cognizant of the world around him. There are actually no gaps really in the way that Mario sees the world and what is communicated, at least from his perspective. There's no felt lack. He's just being himself. And it's made very specific in this section that he understands jokes. He understands the things that people are actually trying to say to him. He feels very deeply, especially love for other people. And that there's a very sad, undesirable feeling that he gets that is described. The thing that really happens to him a lot is this whole issue is far above Mario's head. He was unable to understand Lyle's replies when he tried to bring the confusion up. And Hal was for once no help, because Hal seemed even more uncomfortable and embarrassed than the fellows at lunch. And when Mario brought up real stuff, Hal called him boo-boo and acted like he'd wet himself, and Hal was going to be very patient about helping him change. That is something he encounters all the time. It is people who are constantly assuming that he has less capacity than he does, right? And that for the reader, especially a first-time reader, you, unfortunately, because you're viewing his experience entirely externally for the first 500 pages of this book, are of the opinion that he does have less functioning and less understanding than he does. And that this book is really, or that this chunk of this book is really flipping that on its head and revealing that truth to the reader. And I think that speaks to the idea of what we've kind of stuck with, is this line of like, Mario is the ideal, and Mario, from our perspective, might get taken advantage of, but from his perspective, it certainly is not being taken advantage of. And on top of that, from like an outside perspective, if the character had known the capacity that Mario does have in any given situation or conversation or interface, that there would be no opportunity to take advantage of him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
This is, again, like really abstract stuff, because it's dealing with like perception versus reality, and almost in a certain way like map and territory stuff too, where we're really putting a lot of this book together as we're backfilling in the information with the conclusions now. And it's again a moment of like, he pulls the rug out from the reader a little bit. He twists the knife a little bit. He makes it a little bit more complicated, where you have this opinion of Mario as someone who can be easily taken advantage of. And you suddenly say, well, not so much. You know, maybe he didn't misunderstand the Millicent Kent situation. Maybe he just didn't want to kiss Millicent Kent. And so was just playing along with this, or trying to find a way to change their gathering into a search for something else, as opposed to just telling her that he wasn't interested in potentially hurting her feelings. Because it is, to Mario, the most important thing is, and I love the way he describes Enid House. The most important thing to Mario is, as it's put here on 591, Mario likes the place. It's crowded and noisy, and none of the furniture has protective plastic wrap, but nobody notices anybody else or comments on a disability, and the headmistress is kind to the people, and the people cry in front of each other. The inside of it smells like an ashtray, but Mario's felt good both times in its house, because it's very real. People are crying and making noise and getting less unhappy. And once he heard somebody say God with a straight face, and nobody looked at them, or looked down, or smiled in any sort of way where you could tell they were worried inside. Like, that is what is important to him. And so, like, he's not going to act in a way that is not, interested in furthering that importance, right? And it reframes a lot of the stuff with Mario that we've read prior, in a way that's like, I think, especially on a first time read, like a little sobering, of like, Wallace has really put you in a position where you are also prejudging this person. And I think that a lot of the work that he's doing to establish empathy, sincerity, earnestness in the preceding 500 pages, and the importance of all of that, by showing you how damaging the inverse of it is, that you're primed to have that compassion and that sincerity and that earnestness open up once you're revealed, or once that new perspective is revealed, if that makes sense. It's a very powerful moment in the book and of this chunk in my perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, we've talked before about Mario's wholesomeness and the fact that he is a very genuine character. He's not putting on any kind of front. He's not trying to be someone he isn't. There's two parts in this section that I think really exemplify, well, maybe three. They really exemplify his character and his inherent goodness. Two of them are on 590. His nighttime prayers take almost an hour and sometimes more and are not a chore. He doesn't kneel, it's more like a conversation. And he's not crazy. It's not like he hears anybody or anything conversing back with him, Hal's established. So I think I don't necessarily, and this is kind of hinted at later with the third thing that I'll mention, but Mario's idea of spirituality seems to be very internalized. And I think
Yeah.
this prayer of his is less of a reaching out to a divine being and more of just a trying to work something out on his own philosophically. Um, and that's, I think, a huge part of his character is that he's not, he is, he's always, I guess, just approaching everything from a very genuine perspective. Like
Mhm.
he's not relying on somebody else to tell him how to do it. He's not trying to, to say what people want to hear. Like he is the kind of person that just thinks things through and has the mind of I mean an older person, I guess, really like a more mature person. He's maybe arguably the most mature person in the book. Um, but he also like his compassion for other people and the way he feels about them. Because the other line that I highlighted is on 590. Mario loves Hal so much it makes his heart beat hard.
Uh,
That
what a
melted
line.
me. I was so, oh my god, that is so beautiful and so poetic and
Yep.
just sums him up so much as a character. But
Yep.
then the third one on 592, the worst feeling thing that happened today was at lunch when Michael Pemulis told Mario he had an idea for setting up a dial-a-prayer telephone service for atheists in which the atheist dials the number and the line just rings and rings and no one answers. It was a joke and a good one, and Mario got it. What was unpleasant was that Mario was the only one at the big table whose laugh was a happy laugh. Everybody else sort of looked down like they were laughing at somebody with a disability. So again, Pemulis obviously asshole, but Mario he sees the good in this. Like it's Pemulis doesn't mean this as a sort of kind-hearted like gentle joke, but Mario sees the good inside of it, and he can connect with that, and he's not calling everybody else out about it. He's not putting on a big show about it. He's just recognizing that he's the only one that sees that.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you pointed that part of the story out because I think that also speaks so much to what Wallace was attempting to get started with this new sincerity postmodernism thing that we've discussed in prior episodes, where it really was this reaction to the sardonic quality of postmodernism, the sarcasm of everything,
Mhm.
where it just a little bit before that chunk that you read on 592 it says this one is from 60 Minutes plus or minus his first year, when Madame still had a slight accent and often spoke on the show as if she were talking exclusively to one person or character who is very important to her. The moms revealed that if you're not crazy when speaking to someone who isn't there is termed apostrophe and is valid art. Mario had fallen in love with the first Madame Psychosis programs because he felt like he was listening to somebody sad read out loud from yellow letters she'd taken out of a shoebox on a rainy PM, stuff about heartbreak and people you love dying and US woe, stuff that was real. It is increasingly hard to find valid art that is about stuff that is real in this way. The older Mario gets, the more confused he gets about the fact that everyone at ETA over the age of about Kent Blott finds stuff that's really real and comfortable and they get embarrassed. It's like there's some rule that real stuff can only get mentioned if everybody rolls their eyes or laughs in a way that isn't happy. It's I think that that's Wallace's whole deal, like summed up, as far as what he was hoping to accomplish, is bringing about back a return to this real art, this real life stuff, for lack of a better sort of phrase to use. And I think that the reason why maybe Mario provokes a reaction in people is because they might also be uncomfortable with someone being that real, being like Mario. That there is something of a recoiling there, not because we don't like nice people, but because of the cultural milieu that we live in now has bred us to believe that like someone being that nice, there's something wrong with them. Either they're like simple in sort of a in like intelligence way or a disability way, or they're trying to deceive us in some way. And that the idea that that might be genuine earnestness, genuine sincerity all the time with no need for a qualification or like a repayment is something that is very uncomfortable to come up with and explain when you come out of a society and a cultural context that doesn't prize that. I mean, sarcasm, the thing that Pemulis is about to do in response to him, like if you go back and etymologically look at the origins of that word, it means to tear flesh with the mouth. Like that's what the original Greek root of it means. So I think that it's again through these elements that you've particularly highlighted is showcasing the way in which our reaction to Mario says a lot about us rather than a lot about him. But we don't necessarily see it that way or want to see it that way at first. Do you have anything else you want to add on the Mario piece?
I don't. I just love Mario.
He's great.
He more
Amazing.
and more becomes like my favorite character as I read
Yeah.
through this again.
And I think the other thing that I was talking to Allie about is that, like, if we're looking at this book's major characters as different icons of Wallace as a man or different periods of Wallace's life, I think you can map that pretty cleanly, actually. Where Hal is kind of Wallace as the younger, promising, sort of prodigious athlete who maybe starts to make a few bad decisions in life, but nothing crazy. Orin, I think, represents the Wallace that was like really that was really sort of oh man, how do I want to put this? Maybe I'll come back to Orin. Hal is the one that I already mentioned. James in Candenza is kind of the Wallace that is at his lowest point, like when he was in addiction and when his life is falling apart and when the kind of promise that he was showing in life was getting disrupted by all this like chaos and strife. That Orin is the version of him that's very arrogant, like when he was sort of in his like postmodernist avant-garde phase. There was a lot of a refusal. He talks about in a lot of interviews and a lot of stuff that he wrote about himself. There's like a very real refusal to admit that the stuff he was writing was bad, that he wasn't dealing with certain elements of his personality well, and that he was kind of allowing himself to believe his own hype, and that he was mistreating women in particular through these disordered relationships he had with them, and that he was really getting in his own way, which of course would eventually lead to the James, Incandenza route of life, and then that Mario really represents him as the person who's gone through recovery in a very real way and is now attempting to spread that kind of new sincerity out to the world, is trying to model what he hopes other people should do. So I think you could kind of map his career and his development as a writer and as a person onto all of these different male Incandenza characters and how they represent different stages in his life.
I hadn't considered that, but that's a really interesting idea.
Now, of course, you don't need any of that in order to enjoy the book as it is.
No,
but
it adds an interesting layer to it.
Yeah, as a wannabe David Foster Wallace scholar, that's my unified theory of the Incandenza men. We're treated to another sort of Gately schedule, the things that he does on a day-to-day basis with his shifts. There's a great running joke in there about Rice Krispie treats being a mess and who decided to make them. This is setting up a thread that's going to cross with the the Lenz and Bruce Green segment later. I don't really have any much to say on it beyond that.
Yeah, I don't either.
And then we are also given another return to Oren and the woman that he has seduced. Um, and it's just a lot of Oren being a user is the best way that I can put
Yeah,
who Oren
yeah.
is. But then also the fact that like Oren's fucked. Like the AFR the AFR is in his hotel room and at his hotel's front door, and he's in love with USDOUS agent.
Uh-huh.
He is roundly screwed in all ways that you possibly can be. And the spoiler email we got was that I revealed that Oren's sending out the entertainment tapes to people. There's a clue to that in here that when he leans out into the hallway, to try and figure out who could possibly be there. So like he's looking for someone who could be potentially looking for him. His options that he picks from are like a jealous husband, a Near Eastern medical attaché, and one other one that I can't remember the name the description of right now. So like he admits right there that there would be a reason for a Near Eastern medical attaché to send someone to kill him.
Mhm.
And of course, the tape is also sent from Phoenix. There's a number of other little details there, but since I already spoiled it, I might as well explain myself.
Lean into it.
And then from there, that brings us to the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, go team. Do you have anything that you want to talk about that we didn't cover?
I think we were pretty thorough.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah.
All right, we have a mountain of correspondence. You guys have really engaged with this mini series in a way that
Yeah.
has been really encouraging.
The response has been phenomenal. Yeah, we got 3 emails from Matthew. So thank you, Matthew. And I'm just going to read all 3, and then we'll kind of address everything that gets brought up in them. First one, big fan. Goes to show the power of including comparisons to other works you're currently reading. Your articulation of the Alamo and the tendency to continually erase its history to uphold a positive national image has encouraged me to write a Marxist analysis of why right-wing/fascist nations have a motive to erase and scrub their national history from a strictly historical materialist viewpoint. The workers have nothing left to lose but their chains. His next one says, "Hi again. Apologies for the over-eccentricity of my last email. The drop of your last IJ episode happened to coincide with THC Soda Night. Enormous fan of your channel, and I look forward to the beginning of each one."
I
Man.
love the way that's worded as if it's a calendar event.
Yeah. Just want Just wanted to shoot you another email commenting on next month's pages. I'm a huge Lynch fan, so I tended to kind of have that lens when reading IJ, but I couldn't help but crack myself up reading the blindfolded Arslanians dialogue around page 570 as the voice of David Lynch/Gordon Cole. Holy hell.
You want me to do this?
I was about to say, you are the resident Gordon Cole impersonator. Something about the sort of dorky overly exclamative and detailed articulation. Take it away, Kate.
It is I, Idris Arslanian, wearing a rayon handkerchief as a blindfold over my features. I am disoriented and wishing badly for a lavatory. Wondering also what is ensuing inside the weight room, where Shact alleges you are all watching Doucette weep in clinical depression. Mike Pemulis, you are you are in motion a prince and in repose a sage.
It's very, very thankful you pointed that out. It's fantastic. And then the last one just says skipping ahead admittedly, but now try picturing the character Selwyn in a few hundred pages as a Jack Nance performance. Okay, I will keep that in mind.
Cooper!
Yeah, so So regarding what you said about right wing fascist sort of erasure of history, I think that you're definitely right on with that. I think that's been proven time and time again that you have to whitewash history in that sense, because if people have the ability to look back and see the events that actually happened and the way they happened, they can start to kind of uh, get an understanding of what the people in charge are capable of, and it could be a dangerous thing. To quote Gravity's Rainbow, if you can get them asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. So it is definitely something that happens. We're watching it happen in real time, and it's, I think, a little bit more easy for them to do in a digital age. So it kind of gives them that leg up on doing it. But at the same time, anything on the internet never really goes away. So that, just as easily as they can get rid of it, it gets saved too. So we have that to work with our advantage.
Yeah, agreed. I still can't believe Joe Biden quoted that section of Gravity's Rainbow at a speech once.
I know. That was wild.
Legendary footage. We got 2 from Xander. The first came technically in response to 2 episodes ago, but he sent it in after we had already recorded the episode for last month, so we're getting to it this time. And he says, "Hi again. Thanks once again for your answers to my previous questions. I found your response concerning Tiny Ewell particularly insightful and poignant. On the topic of the next 100 pages, 410 to 503, I had a few questions. Personally, I believe this is one of the strongest sections in the book, and also contains 2 of my favorite episodes, namely the Eschaton segment and the conversation between Steeply and Morath. 1. I think that one of the major themes in Infinite Jest is that of projected realities versus true realities. Throughout the novel, characters are influenced by others' expectations and preconditioned opinions, as well as generational inheritances from past relatives and relations. This pattern can be seen with characters like Hal, who is bound by his familiar cycle of addiction and obsession. My question concerns this segment, specifically the AANA chapters. If these institutions function due to the efficiency of their methods, or due to the faith the addicts place in these institutions as it relates to healing the aforementioned cycles, and if the institutions themselves are but another cycle. I've been reading Steinbeck's East of Eden and have noticed a lot of similarities in regards to the themes of generational cycles and the will to choose. Such relations led me to ponder the discussion that Steeply has on the mountain with Morath concerning choice as a broader concept. I thought your analysis of how the scene was pretty spot on, but was left wondering about how choice and addiction relate to each other. If people can become addicted to a state of excessive choices, as suggested in the novel, what do you think the choice to escape such a state of entropic overload entails? Anyways, sorry for the longer email, but this section is one of my favorites and had me thinking a lot. Much thanks, Xander Miguel Dominguez. I can take 1 if you want to take 2.
It's fitting that I take 2 because I just finished East of Eden today.
Absolutely. So in response to what you had to say about like the effectiveness of AA and NA, I find interesting the question in particular. I find interesting because what it actually reminded me of at first was a class that I had to take in seminary on the tulip theory of Calvinistic Christianity, which is a really, really long sentence. But essentially, in this class, we were talking about how in Calvinism there's an acronym called TULIP that defines the entire process of salvation from a standpoint of like who is saved, why, how, and then also like what awaits them after they die. I'm not going to get into the whole of TULIP because it's not really expedient to answer your question. But one of the things in TULIP is the letter L, and the L in their acronym stands for the phrase limited atonement, which within Reformed Christianity refers to the idea that Jesus Christ died on the cross not for everybody, but for only some people. So essentially, the idea behind this would be that within a modern context, a lot of people say that, like, oh, the sins of the world are up on the cross, and all you need to do to become a Christian is to just say you believe in Jesus and you're saved. Your sins are paid for because it's for everybody. That's like a very popular modern concept of Christianity, especially within evangelical circles. What the limited atonement basically argues is that rather than that model, what it actually is the cross is, as they would put it, sufficient for everyone, but efficient only for some. In the sense that Jesus' sacrifice could be for everybody. It would be a big enough sacrifice to cover everybody's sins, but it only actually covers the sins of the people who are going to be saved. Because if God is a just God, then if he assigns a punishment to somebody that requires, that punishment to be paid to atone for something, he cannot punish his son once for everybody and then also punish the individual sinners who are going to hell. It would make him unjust. So therefore the only sins that are going to be on the cross are that Jesus actually paid the punishment for. That's a long setup, but I promise it's relevant. Within the question of like, why does NA work for some? Is it because it's misallocated, or not misallocated, reallocated energy that would have been used in the cycles of addiction into the cycles of recovery? Maybe. Is it, a let me look at your exact wording here. Is it that the institutions function due to the efficiency of their methods? Is it the methods that work? Maybe. Or is it due to the faith that the addicts place in those institutions? Maybe. Any of those three reasons can be sufficient for somebody. Anybody who's going to go through recovery, that can be sufficient for them. But that does not in and of itself mean that NA and AA are going to be efficient for everybody. In the same way that Christ's sacrifice should be sufficient for everybody, it doesn't mean it's efficient for everybody. In that, I think it is less about the reason why NA works or AA works, and more about the fact that it does work. Now, nobody knows who it's going to work for. It's impossible for you to point at somebody and say, that guy it's going to work for, that guy it's not going to work for. But that doesn't in and of itself make it not worth trying if you're in a position where stepping into recovery could succeed if you tried AA or NA. That is my perspective of it anyway. NA worked for me. I know plenty of people that it did not work for. And when you have something like an addiction that so completely messes with every impulse within your head and within your reaction to stimuli and your environment and your motivation and everything, I feel uncomfortable saying that I succeeded because I was smarter or better or less addicted than somebody else, because these things affect people in very massive ways. And that's not to say that that's what I think you're implying with your question, but I think that if you're trying to examine why it works for some and why it doesn't work for others, or why it works in an effort to narrow down who it'll work for, I think it's possible that you'd be cutting yourself off from people trying it and really potentially getting clean and sober, or getting introduced to the idea that they can be. That's a really long answer to your question. But I thought about it for a long time before we recorded this.
So to tackle part 2 of this, I'm going to be careful about how I say all of this, because I don't want to spoil parts of East of Eden, even though it is a 75-year-old book at this point. I know.
Do you want me
I know
to
Kate
walk out of
hasn't
the
read it.
room and then you
No,
can
'cause
message me when you're done?
there's also people who listening might not have read it, and so I can work around it. So basically, I will link the second part of this question to Adam Trask specifically in the novel. A lot of what East of Eden is doing is definitely playing on cycles of really more so with good and evil, and the sort of nature of humanity, and I think that's something that Steinbeck explored in a good chunk of his work. But addiction, obviously addiction doesn't really come up in that story, at least not explicitly. I think you could maybe make some connections to Kathy and some of the later parts of her story arc. But anyways, I think with that, I think it's kind of implied that there is an inherent um, circularity that families get stuck into, and I don't think maybe it happens as much anymore, but it definitely happened in the earlier part of American history and even going back. But if we're just looking at it in the frame of East of Eden, you definitely had that sort of circularity as far as like the luck and the choices that a lot of the characters made within their own family lines, and it as far as the conversations with Steepley and Marath, um I don't know. I have to really think about this one a little bit more because I just, like I said, I just finished this East of Eden literally like 10 minutes before we started recording today. Um, but to answer I guess the overall question at it is if people can become addicted to a state of excessive choice, as suggested in the novel. What do I think the choice to escape such a state of entropic overload entails? I think that that choice is I guess really, if anything, it's just an example of cycle breaking, to use the most simplistic term of that. Um, I think it takes that sort of willpower to want to remove yourself from that, and it's not something that's easily done, and it's not even something that's easily recognized. I think that's the main issue there is that so many people who get stuck in that cycle, whether it's with addiction or any kind of, familial um positioning or anything like that, it really ultimately comes down to you have to recognize the problem before you can ever really fully address it. And the characters in Infinite Jest that recognize it and accept it are the ones that kind of are able to have a better chance of breaking that cycle. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves with how Infinite Jest resolves, but I think if you want, I think a good example that I can think of that really does a good job of examining the cyclical nature of addiction is The Wire. I think especially when you look at a character like Bubbles and his story arc throughout that, especially in the last couple of seasons when he really starts taking rehab seriously, um, that show probably exemplified addiction better than any other TV show that I can think of. Um, and I would even say it's on par with Infinite Jest as far as its examination of that. Obviously, it's tackling a lot of other things on top of that, so that's a whole different ballgame. But if you want to point to another good example of how circular that is, not just within a single person, but generationally and within a certain location, even, that's where you're going to find a really good representation of that.
Well, of course, too, when Bubbles gets clean, I forgot the name of the kid, the high schooler.
Oh,
Who
Dookie,
Duquan. Yeah. It, like instantly takes his place essentially.
Yeah. That's kind of the beauty of that whole thing is that they're by the end of that show, everybody, all the younger generation has moved into the place of the older generation. They've all filled in those roles that kind of have to exist in there. They have to complete the cycle.
Brilliant television.
Absolutely.
We got another email from Xander.
We did. You want to take this one?
Yeah, I can do his too. Primarily, I would like to congratulate you all on another great episode, one which I think is definitely in your top 10. As for questions, as always, a few came to mind. 1. The tragedy of Eric Clipperton has always been one of my favorite sections, but hearing you all analyze it really aided me in identifying precisely what causes me to be curious about it. My question concerns the weight of greatness and how it warps reality. On my first reading of Clipperton, I interpreted him as a tragic comic character of no apparent importance besides being a reflection of the American psyche. But thinking about it more, I now interpret him as a solely tragic character who becomes imprisoned by his pathological need for success, which when achieved is unfulfilling. I was just curious what you both think of this theory. 2. The encounter with the AFR in the video store is one of the most graphic and grueling sections of the book and masterfully employs the contrast, which Wallace is so adept at. My question for this scene is more focused on Wallace's actual use of violence in the novel. The moments of violence depicted in the novel are always quite gruesome. Yet, do you believe that this is merely to shock the reader into observation and introspection, or merely to shock the reader? 3. I've been reading War and Peace and remarkably noticed some correlations between it and the mattress scene, easily one of my favorites. In War and Peace, there is this ideology that one can go on and find meaning for themselves in their subjective realities. Yet, in Infinite Jest, the characters are so weighed down by their generational inheritances that the pursuit of meaning seems foreign and impossible. I was just curious if you think these characters are doomed to accept their inheritances, e.g., James with the tomato juice, or if they can choose to procreate a new future. Sorry, I just realized how long this email is. Anyway, thanks in advance and always for a great episode, as always.
I'm going to take the last part of this first and say that, Xander, you should know by now you don't need to apologize for long emails. My guy, we're on like 3.5 hours on this episode at this point.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
are all about long form discussion, so please don't ever feel like it's too much. We are always happy to discuss.
Oh, and also, I think we genuinely look forward to receiving
we
your
do.
email.
Yeah, it's always like you have posed some genuinely phenomenal questions that have made the both of us really re-examine a lot of this, and I'd say that as someone who's read this only twice now. But Kate, you've read this numerous times, and you know this is the questions being posed are phenomenal. So,
do you want to take 1 and 2? I only have good answers for probably 2 and 3, but I can just take 3.
To talk about to answer the first part, I think you're onto something there. I'd have to go back and really kind of reread that section with that in mind. But I do think that you're probably on to the right track with that. I know we kind of had our own examinations of that particular scene and how we analyzed it, but I don't think either of us came at it from that particular angle. It definitely does match with the theme of the book, and it is a very American way of going about kind of that attention-seeking behavior and that drive for success at any cost. So I definitely think that you're not wrong. I guess that's the best way I can say that. That's kind of the tricky thing with a book like this, is that there's really not necessarily a singular right way to dissect any of this. I think as long as you can support what you're getting at with textual evidence, you know, and that's definitely what you're doing. So I think I would have to go back and reread it, and I probably will with that in mind because it's a relatively short section.
Yeah.
As far as the second question, I don't think that it's done necessarily in any way to shock the reader, whether it's for observation and introspection or just for the sake of shock. I think, for me at least, I think that the scene being as violent as it is in a way grounds it. I think that if it was trying to be shocking, whether for good or bad purposes, I think it would be more over the top than it is. And I don't think it's that. It is very graphic. I definitely agree with that. But I think that it's effective in its use of violence insofar as it is portraying it in a very real and visceral way. You know, we're seeing what the people in that room would have seen. And it's hard to get through, but I think it's a defining characteristic of like noir writing. And I think that's kind of what he was leaning into right there is, you know, you have these sort of hyper violent moments that are not necessarily over the top, but they are very, very challenging and very, very graphic in their portrayal of what's happening. And so I think that's what he's getting at there. It absolutely could and probably does shock some readers. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's doing what it's doing effectively and for no other reason than to ground it in the reality of that situation.
Well, I think the other thing too is like when you're looking at it from a shock perspective, like do we mean shock just for the sake of shock? Because then yeah, that's definitely not good. But if it's meant to shock the reader for example, to show the brutality of the AFR. Like, if you're trying to hype up this as like a super effective spy organization or a governmental sort of undercover agency, then how do you effectively deliver on that, especially after you've already given them the handicap of like being wheelchair bound? You create a scene that is incredibly tense and gruesome, but also possible in its depiction to show that those people are still very deadly. Um, and I think that can work because it teaches the reader something alongside that shock you're looking to impart on them. But I absolutely agree with what you said there, Cody. I think, and I didn't think about this until you had given your answer to question one. What you really said put in my head the fact that like it is also a very distinctly American kind of addiction to be addicted to athletic achievement,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that like LeBron James just won't retire because he I think wants one more ring than Michael Jordan, but then also like just is addicted to like competition itself, the achievement of the sport of being the best at that thing. Or like when Tom Brady came back
Mhm.
and played in Tampa Bay, and Gronk came back with him and played in
Yeah.
Tampa Bay, just to like go after it again, and the consequences of that were dire for Tom Brady. He lost his wife Giselle
Yeah.
Bundchen
Yeah.
and like his whole family
But he
just
got another
because
ring.
he
He got
did get
another
another
ring.
ring out of it, but like at the cost of his entire
Yeah.
life,
Yeah. Well,
basically.
let's be honest, like, I don't wanna speculate too much on that, but
No.
I don't know where his priorities lie, but I think it's kind
Yeah,
of evident in the fact that he's made the choice he made, so
yeah, I agree. But from an outside perspective, losing, like everything in your life, basically. So I think that it could be a comment on that addiction to achievement or successive achievement that is common in sports, especially. Um, I don't know if any of that is in there, but that's what I thought about in response to your answer, Cody. And then I have not read War and Peace myself. I can answer your question though, because I think that at its heart, what you're asking is like, are the characters in this book doomed to be stuck in these like multi-generational cycles that don't allow them to kind of grow out of them? I would say no, because Mario does. I would say that what this book is trying to depict in the difficulty of like self-actualization, the further that history goes on, is that there's just more stuff, for lack of a better term. Like, there is more inherited trauma, there's more cyclical trauma that is built up in your family, some of which, may produce itself epigenetically, some of which might just happen because you're exposed to it in a certain way. There are a number of reasons why that gets more complicated. The kind of older your bloodline gets, and the more opportunities your family has had to fuck it up, especially now with like record keeping and photos and letters and all the stuff that keeps history around longer, like literally. But also, what Wallace talked a lot about in interviews is that like the book is fractured because it mimics. He doesn't say the internet, but that's essentially what he's implying. It mimics the internet in a certain way, where as electronics and technology and the internet and entertainment gets more complicated and more populous because more people have access to it, and because it's an emerging market, there's going to have to come a point where you're going to have to figure out what to assign as important and unimportant. That essentially there's so much shit flying at you, as he would put it, that it's really hard to sift out what you should hold on to and what you should let go of. And that is, in his mind, is part of why the book is fractured in the way that it is. So I think that too, the other side of it isn't just the familial stuff, it's just that the environmental difficulty that exists the further into the millennium we get, and the deeper into the problems of humanity in general that we get, the harder it's going to be to escape that history that is being written and recorded and remembered in ways that it never had been before, especially with, also like longer lifespans and everything. Um, and it's not hopeless because obviously Mario escapes it. Don Gately escapes a different kind of cycle before it can build into the next generation. I think what the book is interested in doing is showcasing the difference between the people who do escape it and the people who don't. I think is really one of the big things there. Like, how do these processes start? How do they continue? And also, how do you get out of them? And if you're not going to get out of them, what happened? What did you do? I think that's really a lot of what Infinite Jest is about at its very core. And you can get really granular with it as far as like how he analyzes that, and obviously we've done some of that. But I think that ultimately that is what he's seeking to do. I don't know if you have anything to add to that too, Cody.
No, that was spot on.
All right, so we're through some of our correspondence.
I know there's one more from Richard that we missed on our last one because I think he sent it the day we had recorded for the last month episode. He says, "Hi there. To be honest, after the first introductory IJ episode, I almost didn't continue, but I have been, and I'm glad I did. More than anything, I enjoy how often I hear you two laugh genuinely and say things like so good, so funny, beautiful writing, top tier, genius. It has reminded me of how enjoyable it is to read this huge, sad, difficult novel from page to page, most pages anyway. I find the commentary frequently knowledgeable and caring. Occasionally, I find you get something wrong, which somehow makes it even better because no one should get everything right about this book. I will point out one of those things, though. There's a lot of good scholarly work in the Wallace studies that does not revolve around his suicide. I feel like the popular/internet discourse is more beholden to Wallace's suicide, but there's plenty of research done by literature scholars that is not like this. You've mentioned several times recently how Oren is smitten by Hugh as Helen Steepley. This is something I have never understood in a novel. Even if Hugh does a good job of presenting as an attractive woman, which the scene on the outcropping calls into question, Helen does not seem to be Oren's type. No small child. Am I missing something? Lastly, I wanted to mention that the venerated Wallace I is doing a group read that has roughly the same cadence through the novel as you have. Thanks and take care, Rick." Thank you, Rick. Glad that you stuck with it, and I'm glad that you have been enjoying it. We are nothing if not repetitive in our frequency of saying certain phrases over and over. So I'm glad that you're not tired of it. But yeah, well, we mentioned earlier in the episode, I think a lot of times people either forget or don't talk about just how funny this book is, and it does a disservice to it, I think, because it is definitely tackling some large and some very dark themes, but it is also a very heartfelt and very just downright funny book. As far as the Hugh and Oren thing, we talked about this, I think, the last time about how there's really no indication as to what Oren sees in Steepley, other than just there's this attraction that exists there, and kind of the interesting part of it, or what makes it so funny, is the fact that we never really know particularly what it is that drives that desire, but it's definitely there. So I think it's very open to interpretation, if nothing else.
As far as the Oren and Helen stuff, I think, I don't know, this might be one of the few cases where I think to myself, simplest answer is often the correct one. It's just really fucking funny that Wallace spends a lot of time describing how poorly disguised Helen Steepley is as a woman, and then he has a womanizing character who should be, if you sleep with a lot of women, you probably know what they look like, sort of a vibe.
Yeah.
And he's not able to tell. I'll have to think more about whether or not I think there's something deeper there, especially as we go on through the rest of the book. But it might just be that, and that I would be okay with that. That would be a funny thing all on its own.
Yeah. And then to address your point of the idea that we get things wrong, like, absolutely. I think we've talked before about how, like, I'm always a big believer that there is no singular right or wrong way to interpret any kind of art. I think it's entirely subjective, and as long as you can kind of get something from it, even if you can't articulate it very well, if it means something to you, that's what it is. That's the purpose of it at the end of the day. And I think that's something that draws us to these kind of works, the Wallaces and the Pynchons and the Lynches, and it lends itself so much more to subjective interpretation and allows for multiple viewings, multiple engagements that can change your perception of it over time. So the idea of any of us at any point ever being quote unquote right about something, like I think we definitely find times that we agree with things and we agree with each other, but we also disagree with each other a lot too. And we'll come back to things and say, oh yeah, we were wrong about that, or that didn't really make sense. That's just the way that literary discourse, I think, is meant to work, and it frustrates me when people kind of insist on a sort of singular black and white interpretation of something.
We get stuff wrong all the time. This next email is an example of when I totally fucked something up. The man with the Nehru jacket who provides the entertainment is not himself. It's 60s Bob. Comes from Justin Burchell. You're exactly correct. Not that this is an excuse for my behavior in the last episode, but I had been up since 2 a.m. that day doing inventory at my job. And so when I was revisiting my notes and just sort of flipping along with the book as we were recording through, I reread the section in a really quick glance, and I was like, "Is that himself?" It's not. It is not at all. And that's just in that episode forever now, and that's okay. As long as people continue listening to our show and get to this point right now that I'm speaking in, they'll know that I was wrong. It is 60s Bob. Um, he is an associate of Timothy Leary, and he collects psychedelic drugs from the 1960s mostly, and that's why he has that, and that's why he sells it to the Entitois, along with the DMZ, and that's how Pemulis gets it.
And fun fact that also somebody individually, or not someone separately on YouTube commented the exact same thing about 3 weeks ago at 140. Is this possibly 60s Bob? I believe he's also described with the Nehru jacket. So, yeah, we get things wrong. It happens.
Yes. Do we have anything else, or that was the last one?
No, that's actually it. Yeah, I thought we had more on YouTube, but they're all for other Pynchon stuff, so.
I guess we can also shout out that if anyone wants Elegant Complexity, we can forward them Joseph's email.
Yes. That's a good point. I'll put that in the show notes as well. If anyone's interested, they can send us an email. I don't want to put it out fully like into the ether, but yeah, if you're listening this far in, check the show notes, send us an email, and we'll send it over to you.
All right. So that brings us to the end of this episode. For next month, your homework, everybody, is to read to the page break on page 698. If you happen to have a different pagination, in case there's one that we're unaware of, the last line that you're going to be reading to is going to be, "She could barely stand to think about them, even at the best of times, which the present was not." And then at the beginning of the next section after the page break, it is the 14th of November, year of the dependent adult undergarment. As always, thank you all for listening. If you are interested in supporting the show, there's a couple of different ways to do so. One is to donate to us directly on Ko-Fi. Any funds that you send our way are going to be used to pay for hosting fees and any equipment upgrades we may run into, or books that we need to buy for supplemental literature and education. And we have already been able to put the money that has been donated to really good use up to now. You can also pay for some shirts, or some bags, or some stickers, or a coffee mug on our Ko-Fi. You can get merch at Mapping the Zone there on Ko-Fi. Or if you would like to support the show with your correspondence in the way that a number of people have, you can do so either by emailing us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com, reaching us out. I do that a lot. When at a long recording session, I will just suddenly go reaching us out. Reaching out to us on YouTube through the comments as we read out, but we're also on Blue Sky at Mapping the Zone Pod. We're also on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Pod. We hit 400 followers today. Luke shared, which is exciting. Growing our presence all over the place. Yeah. And until next time, thank you all for listening.
Bye.
Bye.